Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku became the mysterious vigilante, Specter? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. There are many inspiring quotes about equality and justice floating around in the hazy sphere of common knowledge, and many more buried in history tomes now rarely read. All men are created equal. In the Declaration of Independence, the moral arc of the universe is long but it bends towards justice. From Martin Luther King, the righteous care about justice for the poor, but the wicked have no such concern. In the Bible, injustice alone can shake down the pillars of the skies and restore the reign of chaos and night. From Horace Mann. Crusaders of justice have been inventing these sayings for thousands of years. Justice for all hangs from the highest branch of a towering tree, a fruit we cannot seem to reach, no matter how many rungs we affix to the ladder with cries of protest, acts of compassion, and blood of martyrs. Always, as a new rung is fixed, the tree raises its fruit higher. Whenever one group finally seems to have gained their rights and their sway, escaped from their demeaning stereotypes and spread their wings, the power structure rearranges to throw some other group into the meat grinder. Celts, Christians, Native Americans, Africans, Catholics, Chinese immigrants, Mormons, homosexuals, Jews, communists, trade unionists, Mexicans, Muslims, atheist, quirked, quirkless. Rest assured that no matter who and what you are, there is someone on earth who hates you for it, and a society somewhere in time that would have ground you into the dirt for it. The downtrodden and oppressed will always be with us. The fight for the rights of the oppressed will always be with us. It is our duty and our sacred trust to keep reaching for the fruit, keep striving and building, grasping for it. Turn a blind eye to an injustice to your neighbor and rest assured that one day, when you find yourself in a similar position, eyes will turn blind to you, but it is not merely a matter of melons. It is a matter of, have you a human soul? The people who suffer on the nightly news from war, or terror, or hunger, or persecution are not just faces. Death tolls are not just numbers. If you came across a child bleeding in the street, would you ask them their nation of origin, their religion, their SXL orientation, their quirk before helping them? These are not things that should be considered, for in a very large universe this is a very small planet and we are not so different, you and I. Midoriya Izuku. Rain pooled on his eyelids until he blinked them open. The grim face of a thunderstorm gazed back, a purple arc of lightning cracking the sky. Thunder sent gentle vibrations through the asphalt. Why was he lying in the parking lot? Had someone knocked him out and left him there? That made no sense. Electric lights buzzed, casting a pale glow across the deserted schoolyard. Who would leave an unconscious kid lying in the street in the middle of the night? The cold seeped through his uniform as Izuku crawled to his feet, ice pooling in his bones. Where were his shoes? Hello. Silence, save the rhythmic tap of the rain. Come on. This isn't funny. Was this even a prank? It wasn't very funny, though a lot of pranks weren't when the joke was on you. Nobody here. Head home then? Gosh, his mother must be terrified if he'd never come home. Hopefully she hadn't called the cops or something. Izuku ran, leaping over puddles, zigzagging down an alleyway, skidding around a corner and bounding up his steps. Mom? He called, sliding through the open door into the warm light of the kitchen. She must have been frantic to leave the door open in the dead of night. Oh gosh, he couldn't apologize enough for this. His mother, though, sat across from two men in fine suits. Cooling mugs of tea lay untouched on the table. The words were too quiet to make out, but it must be very serious business. He couldn't interrupt. When the group glanced up, noting his entry, he presumed, Izuku waved to them, blushing and rubbing the back of his neck in embarrassment. The trio continued their quiet conversation, and Izuku tiptoed away. Mother would explain in the morning. He made his way upstairs, sliding into his room. New clothes, then bed, or maybe just bed. The rain outside his window fell in torrents and he wasn't cold? That couldn't be right. He was soaked, and he should be exhausted too, but a glance at the neatly made bed stirred no thought of sleep. This was too weird. He had to go back down and interrupt them, no matter how important the conversation might be. And where were his shoes? You would be well within your rights to sue, a white-haired man with sagging jowls told his mother. Like that changes anything, she replied in a tone Izuku had never heard before, bitter, defeated. What made his mother sound like that? How dare they? Not for you, not for him, the younger man said, handing over a set of business cards, but for others, maybe. Litigation can't raise the dead. She wasn't crying anymore, but her eyes gleamed red with countless shed tears. What? Who died? Was it one of her friends from work? One of them had been ill with ulcers, but what dash? I am very sorry for the death of your son, the older detective bowed. If I never see another case like this, it will be 50 years too late. Please seek some help when you need it. Call me if you decide to consider lawsuits, or if you need anything more. Thank you, officers, Mother whispered to the men, showing them out. The door was nearly closed. What? Izuku finally screeched. No one gave him a glance, save his reflection in the front window, stark against the black of the thunderstorm outside. Blood matted his hair and ran in ruddy rivers down his face, stains bright on his shirt, soaked though it was. He met his eyes, foggy and distant, no longer piercing emeralds. Fingers and left wrist were broken, twisted like windswept twigs. He clenched his fist, no pain, as if all this were normal now, his natural state. An engine broke the revelry, the officers departing, and Izuku stood, staring at his reflection in the window even as his mother turned out the last of the lights and sniffled herself to sleep on the floor by the couch. His eyes were the worst, that broken, empty gaze, fogged and faded. The blood constantly dripping down to his bare feet, an incessant stream like an infinite hourglass, was bad, but the eyes, his eyes, were the worst. Once he wrapped his head around the word, ghost, Izuku found he could pass through the door as if it were air, and the rain no longer soaked him. The rules of his existence were all in his head, clearly. Were ghosts real, then, or was this Izuku's quirk? His very late but much better than never quirk? Were there any quirks like this? Some allowed a person to be, or at least, seem to be, and what was really the difference? A mythical creature, and some allowed immortality or slow aging of a sort, though they were exceedingly rare, but he'd never heard of this or anything like it. Could ghosts just be a real thing? It might not be a quirk at all. Which was more far-fetched? Hard to say. Izuku was back at school, the sun had chased away the rain clouds and the earliest students had just begun to arrive. This was as good a place as any, then, to look for clues. It could still be something else, right? They said he was dead, but he hadn't seen a corpse. Well, his reflection did look like one, but that didn't count, and this could all be a hallucination, still. Those quirks definitely did exist, and on the whole that seemed more likely than whatever this appeared to be. Izuku's desk waited patiently. He took a seat. Kaken arrived, a scowl glued on his face and two of his friends trailing close behind. Guess the useless Deku couldn't be bothered today, Kaken snorted, putting his legs up on the empty desk, but he had tells, an uncertain waver in his gaze, tension in his fingers. He was nervous. What for it? Did he know about Izuku? Did he know who did this, presuming that this had really happened? What befell Izuku yesterday in the long hours after breakfast that he couldn't recall? Who smashed his dreams, took everything from him, and so much worse, made his mother cry all night? That had been an unspeakable thing to hear. Izuku had cried, too, begging the world to let him comfort her. He couldn't do much, but someone was going to pay, someone had to pay. He couldn't remember when he'd been angry like this before. Fire crackled in his veins. His eyes must be glowing with rage. Their teacher, mousy-haired and looking harassed, shuffled in and herded everyone from their seats. We have an assembly to attend. Get up now. Everyone filed out, making their way to the cafeteria, which doubled as an auditorium, finding seats on the dilapidated chairs. The bushy-haired principal, obviously exhausted and miserable, climbed to an elevated podium and sighed into a microphone. As many of you likely saw in the news, a student passed away. Yesterday, Midoriya Izuku. Izuku blinked. This much attention? For him? It is to my great regret that I must inform you that this was indeed a suicide. Izuku's non-existent blood ran cold. Liar! That can't be right. Izuku screamed to no avail. The principal continued. There will be counselors available to speak with students who feel the need. We are now aware that Midoriya Izuku was often harassed by other students. Expect to see changes in the norms here. There will be a zero-tolerance policy on bullying at this school. There may be a police investigation as well as changes in staff. Which everyone knew was a polite way of saying, people are going to be fired. I would ask all staff to please cooperate with any law enforcement personnel. Students cannot be questioned without a parent present, but I would ask that students also make an effort to cooperate with investigators. I know this doesn't feel the time for. Izuku missed the end of the canned speech. Kaken had stumbled to his feet and fled the room. Amidst the general hubbub, no one noticed, or perhaps no one cared. The blonde ran out of the crowd and kept running. Izuku chased him. Izuku wouldn't have really hurt himself, would he? Why did Kaken run? Could he have killed Izuku? No, it couldn't be an accident maybe? Kaken stopped at an alley and blew up a dumpster, then a rusty bicycle wheel, then a rat-eaten mattress which released a pungent, oily smell into the air as it smoldered. Damn it, Izuku, he screamed before blowing up another dumpster. Damn it, I didn't mean it. Why'd you have to choose yesterday to start listening to me? You never listen. Goddamn ray of sunshine. The despair returned, or rather its memory, the ripping turmoil of hopelessness, and Kaken's word in his ear telling him the way out. Swan dive. The pain and the fear were more from the stress of the decision than the crushing weight of endless tomorrows just like today that forced his hand and sealed his fate. He stood in the eye of the hurricane when he finally chose, so calm he was almost numb. No one locked the stairs to the roof. They probably did now. The door slammed behind him as he peeled off his shoes. He wasn't sure why, he just felt he had to. The breeze ruffled his hair as fingers found their grips in the chain-link fence metal hot from the sun hoisted him up to see the world one last time. A few blackbirds flitted by below. 2 little shrines peeked out from the foliage across a small park. It wasn't worth it. He let go. Izuku collapsed in a heap, gasping as the last few minutes of his life replayed in perfect clarity as if emblazoned in his mind with a branding iron. Kaken blew up garbage in the alley until someone shouted at him and threatened to call the police. He cursed the lady out and left, probably to find an alley with less attentive neighbors. Izuku wandered aimlessly away, walking through fences, houses, trees, mailboxes, and the occasional person. Someone has to pay, he choked. That's what I said. Someone has to pay for hurting me, for hurting her. Didn't realize I was talking about myself, though. I guess I deserve this. He could remember how it had ended now, but the rest of the day he died was still a blank. Whatever made him choose that day to listen to Kaken, he couldn't remember what it was. It was 2 nights later that Izuku learned the subtle art of being a poltergeist. Wandering the darker parts of the city, wallowing in regrets, misplaced hatred and misery, his mind felt like a drawer of socks someone had haphazardly dumped out on the floor with every intent of organizing them later just before winning the lottery and moving to a private island, never to return. He couldn't go home. The very last thing he wanted to see was a familiar face. Let him forget for 5 minutes. Let him pretend. He woke from his revelry to a mugging. The young victim, terror in his brown eyes and silvery ears flat against his head, backed closer to the dirty brick wall. A knife pressed towards his throat. Izuku felt a flare of protective anger and abruptly wind rattled through the alley, every metal object shaking and ringing. The mugger drew back, waving his knife in front of him protectively. Who's there? He growled. Me, hissed Izuku, and the mugger whirled towards him, eyes blown wide. He dropped the knife and ran. Izuku chased him, rage burning strong. He might be dead, but he was still Izuku. He never turned a blind eye to anything. He stood up to Kaken on the playground and got burns for his trouble. He asked people who looked lost if they needed directions. He helped unsteady people across streets on rainy days. The mugger smacked into a dead end, rattling a door and whispering, "Oh please," repeatedly under his breath. About them, the garbage lying in heaps rustled and rattled like it might come alive and bite. The mugger's wild, silver eyes fixed on Izuku and clearly saw something. Maybe he saw Izuku as he was, maybe not. The ghost stepped up to the would-be mugger and, following instincts he couldn't comprehend, whispered, "She would have married you. She loved you warts and all. But she would be so disappointed now. But you'll be dead when you see her next. They'll call her to identify your corpse." Izuku left, somewhat bewildered, while the mugger screamed and begged and apologized. I had no idea what I was talking about, but clearly he knew what I meant. Is that part of it? Precognition? Some instinct for terrorizing people? Did he see me at all, or was it something else he saw? What does it matter? But if I could control it, I could see my mother and apologize at least. He would never live down the shame of all those tears shed on his behalf. But his reflection gods, should he show her that? That bleeding corpse? Moot point. He didn't know how, so he didn't have to choose. It didn't stay moot for long. His powers were linked to emotions, but he could use them in any state of mind. Once he got a handle on them, Izuku could be visible or tangible or both at will. When he wanted it to, machinery malfunctioned in his presence. He could move objects without touching them. The larger they were, and the more he tried to move at once, the less control he had, though he would expand his limits with practice. He could also change the weather in a very localized area about 20 meters square, and people started to see things in the shadows or mists near him, especially the mists. They clearly heard things when he was near too, and he always knew just what to say to put the fear of God in the minds of the would-be thieves, assailants and murderers he met in the back alleys. They ran like the hounds of hell chased them. On one occasion, a mugger ran right to the nearest police station. Izuku found himself laughing for the first time in months, as the woman begged the officers to save her from her father's vengeful spirit. The officers strained their eyes into the darkness and saw nothing before taking the disturbed woman inside. That was another caveat. Izuku was stronger at night. He could show himself by day, but was little good in a fight. The self-hatred was not abandoned. The rage merely turned to sorrow. Izuku couldn't hide from her any longer, not now that he could talk to her, explain something at least. He wished he could do something about his appearance, but that never changed, much as he bid it to. He found his mother walking in the park on a Saturday evening. Bakuga Mitsuki was there, as well as several of Inko's work friends. The dying light cast a halo of red and gold across their faces. He caught some of their discussion. The lot of them had attended a recent film screening, some kind of western maybe, and enjoyed it immensely. Midoriya Inko looked happy. Without him. Not that Izuku'd ever want her to be sad, never, but she hadn't smiled like that in years. She'd been so sad on the day he died, but was it just a passing feeling? Did she not miss him? Sometimes, all the time, he seemed a source of despair, like he kept her from smiling, like he chased his father away, a useless waste of space, just like Kaken said. Worthless, and here she was, smiling, like she hadn't smiled in years. The world really was better off without him. He turned around and paced back into the endless twists of the alleyways that wormed across the city. Let them forget about him, forget the name Midoriya Izuku, the worthless boy who threw away all of his chances and potential. He was dead after all, and everyone was better off this way. Everyone. For someone who had so often worn a fake smile over a pit of misery, Izuku was terrible at spotting such masks on others. He never strayed close enough to see the emptiness in Inko's eyes, the hollowness of the upward twisted lips, the deception that fooled none of her concerned friends. The villain was a moron, but a very big and fast moron. A hefty paw, claws like a tiger and fur to match. Raked inches in front of Shuta's face, air whipping past his cheeks. The half-man half-cat had tried to steal a vending machine without any plan to transport it. Abandoned snacks lay strewn about the half-lit street, many packages split open, others stamped flat. The villain roared, an admittedly impressive noise, and lunged again, definitely stupid, but fast, and he hadn't accounted for the tail, damn it. Claws flashed towards Shuta's face as he rolled on the ground, raising an aching arm to defend, and a flower pot hit the villain dead in the face, pottery shattering. Who threw that? Catch breath first, then questions. Mist drifted over the asphalt. The few streetlights that had survived the hard lives in this part of the city flickered like diseased bees and died out, whispers of indeterminate origin, countless frightened voices, replacing the light. Something cold infested Shuda's blood, the shiver impossible to fight away. Someone the villain howled, "It's not true. It can't be. No, get away." "You know it's true," rasped the reply. There was a jarring crack and a thump as a body hit the ground. By then, Shoyuda had found his feet and stalked closer to the scene of the shadowy confrontation. This fit Specter's MO perfectly. A vigilante who appeared in the area a few months ago, he seemed to have some kind of telekinesis or mind reading, only worked at night, appeared amidst mists and left his enemies screaming in terror. No one was able to give a useful description, save that Specter's hair was very green. A figure crouched over the fallen tiger villain, holding a ratty, faux fur coat to a wound on the man's head. "He tried to jump away," said Specter in a soft, warm voice so unlike the earlier rasp, "and he smashed his head on that balcony." The hand with which Specter gestured was transparent, and he was small. No, he was a child. What the hell did he think he was doing? He was bleeding. Everywhere, soaked in blood. Had he been mauled while Shoyuda was lying on the ground? It had only been a few seconds and he hadn't heard a thing. "You're hurt. Stop that kid. Lie down and don't pass out on me." Where was his DMN phone? An ambulance would be useful about now. "No. I always look this way." "What? I'm not hurt. I can't be hurt as far as I know anyway." Shoyuda reached out for the kid's hair, his hand passing right through. What the hell kind of quirk was that? Here, Specter was solid enough when he pressed Shuda's hand to the blood-soaked cloth on the villain's head. "Sorry about that." "Hey!" Specter was gone like he'd never been there, no sign save the bleeding villain at Shuda's feet. At least he knew what Specter looked like now, though he wished he didn't. Why'd it have to be a kid? He looked younger than Shuda's first years. Metal shattered and circuits sizzled around him, shards embedding themselves in the walls of UA's fake city. Katsuki reached for the next robot, crackling power itching to escape his fingers, but paused, confidence waning for a moment as it was prone to now. There was no one near to see him hesitate as the subconscious feeling seized control of his body. It was like that feeling when, half asleep, one flashes awake in a fright after falling from a cliff in some shadowy dreamscape. God, there's someone right there, in the corner of my eye, someone who will take shrapnel, could be hurt, could die because of me. But he was alone. He'd made sure of it, and ducking beneath the three-pointer's jab he blasted it through a storefront, glass flying out in an arc. Just his DMN brain playing tricks on him. Piece of garbage. He needed a new model. The street groaned as the zero-pointer staggered towards him. Katsuki stared, calculating. Too much even for him. There were other robots left, combatants ignoring them as they fled. He chased the tin cans down and tore them limb from limb. It was satisfying, something to hurt without the backlash of guilt. It wasn't his fault. It really wasn't. Words were just words. They didn't make anyone do anything. They didn't throw people off roofs. "Except when they do," whispered a traitorous half of his mind. "Shut up." Katsuki roared aloud and punched a robot square in the steel face. His fingers howled a protest. He turned his hand over and erased his enemy from the surface of the earth. "You erase a lot of things," his traitorous brain whispered. "Shut up. Shut up." Nothing left to destroy Mike called time. Nothing left to turn his anger against. Nothing save himself. What was he even doing here? Katsuki got off the train early and walked, hands in his pockets and head bowed. There were all kinds of interesting stains on the sidewalk, but before long they all turned to blood and he focused his gaze elsewhere. A big black raven croaked at him, gazing down from a stone wall and tapping its feet expectantly. Katsuki fished through his pockets for a cracker. In the early days of Heroes, there had been a top 10 by the name of Morrigan who could turn herself into a great flock of ravens. An occult practitioner, she had, perhaps inadvertently, spread the legend that ravens were messengers of the underworld, and for a fee might carry blessings, spells, and messages across the boundary of death. Katsuki didn't believe in any of that crap, but he had given away a lot of crackers in the past months. The bird snapped the cracker from his fingers. "Tell that moron. Tell him his notes are doing good and I'm impressed." The bird swept out its wings, air whispering on its feathers as it jumped over his head. Katsuki went back, that miserable morning that the principal gave the news, after exploding enough dumpsters to open a police inquiry or at the very least start an urban legend, and found the nerd's notebook, scorched and soaked but still legible. He read every page. Demon Moron was frighteningly observant, always dead on target, could have been a tactical genius with the right training. If only the nerd dreamed of something else, anything else. He could have been anything he wanted except a hero. There in the mists of might have been were the phantoms of Midoriya Izuku, the military intelligence officer, Midoriya Izuku the detective, Midoriya Izuku the support company analyst, Midoriya Izuku the mayor, the lawyer, doctor, nuclear physics researcher, civil rights advocate, journalist, novelist. How could Izuku be so smart and so stupid at the same time? What a waste. The traitorous part of Katsuki's mind supplied, "Depression is not logical, you moron." How dare he call himself names? Lord, he needed something to explode. Specter waited patiently beside Eraserhead. The underground hero could stay motionless for hours in the rain awaiting his targets. Specter often waited with him, pretending he was a sidekick in training. It didn't matter that his mentor hadn't the slightest clue he was there. The sickly yellow streetlights reflected through the heavy water droplets, casting an eerie glow through the night. 3 stories down, women of the night waited on a corner, money changed hand in an alleyway, and a bouncer turned away a young man who looked more lizard than human. They were all wrong. Midoriya Izuku could have been a hero, maybe not front line, but underground certainly. You didn't need a quirk to wait 5 hours on a roof in the pouring rain. You didn't need a quirk to spin kick an assailant in the face, or use a taser for that matter. Underground work was a game of cunning, patience, and planning. Izuku might not have been brilliant at any of those things, but he had what it took to learn, and given that his true motivation was to help people and not SCK up to the media, underground work would have suited him excellently. The rain poured down, responding to the icy sea of regret into which Specter had fallen. Midoriya Izuku could have shown them all, proved everyone wrong. Specter would give anything to have his chance back. He'd give anything for one last chance to change his mind. Eraserhead moved, a black and white blur lunging between balconies. Specter mirrored his moves clumsily, landing just as soundlessly as the hero who crouched like a viper ready to strike. The goose, the drag dealer actually called himself that, never knew what hit him. The creep's blue eyes widened as he called on the lightning quirk that made him so formidable and found nothing. Specter stayed out of the way and marveled as the underground hero swiped the goose's legs from under him, tying him up in an endless scarf before cuffing and gagging him. The goose didn't get out more than a single yelp. "That was amazing," Specter said, although no one could hear him. Eraserhead dragged the soon-to-be inmate behind a shed and whisper radioed his location to the police. They'd been after this creep for months. If they could flip the goose, they might bring down a sizable drag ring. It wasn't that the creep was hard to take down, for the right hero anyway, but he was always surrounded by cronies who amounted to a serious danger if provoked. Rather than risk collateral damage, the investigators waited to catch him unawares. The patience paid off. An unmarked police car fetched the downed dealer, the entire affair punctuated by only a few whispered congratulations, and then the alleyway was silent once again. Eraserhead clambered back to the rooftops and Specter followed. There were many hours yet before the sun returned. About an hour later, Eraserhead broke up a fight outside a rundown bar and one woman, the instigator, still armed with a bloodied knife, slipped away in the commotion. Specter chased her. Mists closed in and rain pelted down on the cracked streets. He pulled a flower pot, he was very fond of them, down from a third-floor balcony with effortless telekinesis and threw it at the fleeing criminal. It clearly wasn't a flower pot she saw flying towards her out of the fog, not if the blood-curdling screams were any indication. She swiped wildly with her knife as the pottery shattered on her chest. Specter walked up behind her, tapped her on the shoulder, and let her see him as she whirled around. With a howl of terror, she took off in the other direction, right back to the bar, where Eraserhead waited with bloodshot eyes and a twisted, dastardly scarf. Specter found he rarely needed to use the words of fear, as he called them, which was nice because Lord knew it made him uncomfortable. His natural appearance usually sufficed to send common criminals and small-time villains running for their souls. A shout, a crash, someone being thrown through a window, more shouts, silence. Specter padded back to the underground hero, who picked glass out of his palm as he waited for the police. Eraserhead's patrol was over now, and Specter would never be so disrespectful as to follow him after work. He bowed to the hero. Invisibility was no reason to be rude and turned away. It was nearly sunrise, anyway, and Specter ought to find a place to hole up and nap. It probably wasn't really an equivalent to sleeping the day away like a lazy lion at the zoo, but it felt similar, even if he was never actually asleep. "I know you're here, Specter." The vigilante whirled to face Eraserhead, who gazed right at him. How could he see him? He couldn't. The pro stared right through Specter, not at him. "What do you think you're doing, kid?" Eraserhead pierced the silent air with his crimson gaze. "I want to talk to you, preferably before school starts next week." School was starting? Boy, he'd sure lost track of time. The hero sighed. "Fine. Maybe you're not even here, but I think you are. You're gonna get yourself killed, kid, and I don't want to be a part of it." That was soul-crushingly ironic. With one more sigh, Eraserhead went home. Specter fantasized as he made his way down to deserted Dagobah Beach to snooze out the day in one of the less garbage-encrusted areas, about attending UA. A raven swooped low, talon dragging through Specter's intangible hair. He sometimes swore they talked to him. "Impressive words you have written," this one seemed to say. "Fat chance. Everything Izuku did had been worth nothing. Not even his mother had ever complimented any literary endeavor of his, not that she had seen many. Izuku had never had much to offer. Now he was dead, and Specter did have something to offer, meager and illegal though it was. He'd thought the evening couldn't get any worse, and with that in mind he'd told his father he'd had enough. Well, he only said it in his head, but still, and vaulted over the compound wall to wander off into parts unknown. Somewhere along the way he'd acquired a bottle of some kind of liquor from a guy in a trench coat who didn't so much as think about asking his age once he saw some bills. Shudo wasn't really drunk, much as he might like to be. Alcohol, as a general rule, was disgusting. He just couldn't stomach enough to knock him out of reality. It wasn't anything physical that night, just things his father said that froze his heart and boiled his blood. He wasn't even sure now what sidelong glance and snide comment it was that cut. Shudo downed another tablespoon of burning sludge, grimaced, and glared at the faded label on the muddy glass. Screw it for not doing its job. Alright, where was he? The street sign blurred. None of this was familiar. He'd wanted to get lost, looked like he succeeded. Where was his phone? At home. On his bedside table. Well then, it was the middle of the night and he was lost and tipsy, and stupid, because how was this supposed to fix any of his problems? It made them all seem small in comparison, at least. "Are you lost?" "Who was that?" He jumped a full 180 degrees in the air and landed, face to face with a transparent, green-haired boy around his age, soaked and dripping with blood. Oh my God! How had he ended up this far away from the kid so quickly? His feet moved on their own. "Oh, sorry. That's just my quirk. I didn't mean to scare you, I swear. I always look like this." The transparent figure rubbed the back of his neck in embarrassment. "I'm not scared, merely startled," said Shudo carefully. "Who is this guy? What kind of quirk made you look like that?" "Okay." The figure didn't approach, merely waited. "Do you know where you're going? And what might this bloodied stranger do if he said no?" "Of course I do." "All right." With a nod the phantom turned on his bare heel and set off soundlessly down the street, past dozens of dark, identical, run-down apartments and not a single landmark. Oh hell. Wait. I seem to have lost my way a few streets back. The figure nodded, returning to him slowly, carefully, as if trying to avoid spooking a wild animal. "Yeah. This place is really confusing, even in the light. I can show you the way to the nearest rail station, or maybe straight home if it's not too far." "Train station, please." Like he wanted this person to know where he lived, know who he was. "But this way," the boy beckoned and Shudo warily followed. In the distance, two furtive figures darted into an alley. "Keep close," Shudo's guide whispered. A bank of cold fog rolled heavily down the street. It made faces at him, twisted faces, and whispered things Shudo couldn't quite grasp. He shivered and drew closer to the phantom. The entry to the alleyway passed by and the fog retreated as quickly as it had arrived. Shudo raised an eyebrow. His guide shrugged as if daring him to report the illegal quirk use. "What's your name?" asked Shudo after a minute's awkward silence. "Specter." "What kind of name is that?" "The only one I have." "Would you tell me your name?" A first name was probably fine. "Shudo." Specter smiled, which was terrifying, though he likely didn't mean it to be, the blood on his face running over his lip and staining his teeth. "Pleasure to meet you, Shudo. So, what are you doing out here?" Specter shrugged. More blood dripped sluggishly off his shaggy bangs. "I don't have anywhere else to be. Occasionally I do some good out here." "What are you, a vigilante?" Specter shrugged again. "Well, maybe. Places like this, where no one important lives and no one important dies, the frontline heroes don't pay them any mind. The police don't pay much mind either. There are exceptions. Some underground heroes come through from time to time. People like me fit in pretty well, people who don't have names or homes or families anymore. The lines between villains, civilians, and vigilantes blur. So, maybe. And what brought you out here tonight?" None of your business, but Specter was helping him out, and they'd never meet again anyway. There was something liberating about that. He could say anything he wanted. "Running from my problems. I had a fight with my father." Specter nodded. "Sorry about that. I barely remember mine. My father, he left when I was just a kid. He never said it, but I think he was ashamed of me." Shudo blinked. "But you seem perfectly reasonable." Maybe this wasn't something he should ask. Specter's appearance was probably off-putting even to a parent. "Quirkless. I used to be. They thought I was quirkless." "What?" Shudo raised an eyebrow. "Did no one notice the dripping blood, or were you just a late bloomer?" Specter shifted uncomfortably. "It's more complicated than that. There's the train station." Shudo squinted. "There was. I suppose it's at least something that your father sticks around to fight with you." "Crap, I said that aloud. Forget I said that, please. It's none of my business." "Sorry. Anyway, I don't want to come any closer to the station. I make people nervous. Anyway, goodbye, Shudo." Shudo shook himself from the stupor induced by Specter's rapid-fire words. Wait. Thanks." His guide was already gone. "Going home, right?" He'd wandered a shocking distance. The deserted coach trundled north, street lights flashing by in the dark. It was something, perhaps, that his father kept him around, but he was kept like an object, not a person, a dog on a chain to be used as a weapon. Would it be better to be abandoned, like his older siblings were in turn? He winced. No. He'd rather be a dog on a chain than a puppy drowned in a sack. On those days when he felt absolutely worthless, like no one at all cared about him, he longed for his father to come yell at him. At least he was worth shouting at. Speaking of shouting, his father flicked on the light and growled as Shudo tiptoed into the foyer. The two stared at each other before Endeavor said, perfectly deadpan, "You clearly need more aggressive stealth training." "And where have you been?" What followed was a 30-minute lecture and shouting session. Shudo bowed his head. "Better to just take it? Do you have any idea how stupid that was?" "What would you have done then?" "Good Lord, have you been drinking?" I spent the whole night worrying, and I am quite busy tomorrow." "As are you." Did he just say he was worried about Shudo? No, Shudo must have misheard. Tsuyu understood people well. This had always been the case, but even before Class 1A officially began its first lesson, she needed to amend that statement. Tsuyu understood reasonable people well. No one in 1A seemed to be very reasonable. A tall, blue-haired boy who moved like a robot was busily lecturing a short boy with purple ball for hair. Apparently he'd been harassing female students. A young man with crimson-red hair had decided to become friends with a prickly, bleach blonde who repeatedly screamed at him to "Go away, moron," or something similar, and then froze as if paralyzed by anxiety before muttering something along the lines of, "Well, Fine, if you really want to talk. A girl with vibrant brown hair repeatedly thanked a young man for rescuing her from the zero-pointer during the entrance exam. The young man repeated, "Don't mention it," again and again, voice flat, lackluster purple hair and dark eye bags screaming, chronic insomnia. In the back of the room, a boy with candy cane-themed hair appeared to be calculating the life expectancies of his classmates, and apparently none of them had much time left. A huge yellow caterpillar fell through the doorway to a collective shriek, removed his skin and revealed himself to be their teacher. He looked even more exhausted than the boy with purple hair. "All right, change into your PE uniforms and meet me outside. No questions. I was up all night chasing a ghost. I don't want to hear it." "Do you think he meant that literally?" "About the ghost?" asked Gothic-themed Jiro as she stabbed her earphone jack into the eye of the newly declared class pervert Minetta. The pervert had wasted no time in finding the glory hole beneath the poster in the locker rooms and attempting to spy on the girls. "I can't tell if he was sarcastic." "I doubt it," Yayorozu replied. "There are quirks that resemble ghostly legends, or he might just mean a very elusive or stealthy person." No, if Tsuyu read her instructor well, he'd meant it literally. "I think he meant Specter, Karo." "Huh?" asked the invisible girl, Hagakure, as the group exited the lockers at last. "Specter? Right?" Yayorozu was probably the most in the loop of the female hero students. "He's a vigilante who became active around here a few months ago. There's not much public information about him. His quirk doesn't appear to make much sense, but it seems to involve weather manipulation, hallucinations, and maybe invisibility or intangibility. No one's quite sure." The red and white-haired boy had slowly moved closer as the conversation continued. "Listening in, maybe? He's never badly hurt anyone, but apparently he's scared criminals and small-time villains so badly they've run up to police stations in the dead of night and pounded on the doors, demanding help." "Freaky," muttered Ishido, running a hand through her electric pink hair. "He's only active at night and," Yayorozu lowered her voice, "I've heard unsubstantiated rumors that he follows certain underground heroes on patrol sometimes." That was insane. What kind of vigilante would do that? Tsuyu had zero experience being a vigilante, and even she could tell that was a terrible idea. Aizawa called class into session. The blonde who kept flip-flopping between emotions, Bakugo Katsuki, walked to the front as requested and silently lobed a softball halfway to the stratosphere. The physical assessment with stakes suddenly raised to expulsion for the lowest ranked in the competition continued. The scores for the fitness test were tallied and Hagakure was spared expulsion. It was all a logical ruse. Or it turned out that way at least. Tsuyu liked to think about people, trying to figure them out. Whenever someone drew a spectrum of personality traits outgoing to shy loud to quite stubborn to spineless, she usually fell in the middle. It gave her a good view, made it easy to understand most people, but with a few exceptions Ishido seemed straightforward so far she couldn't make heads or tails of her classmates. Confusing though many of the personalities might be, Ida and Yayorozu seemed the obvious choices when they selected class representatives, and Ida proved their good judgment by calming half the school during an intruder alarm the following day. Tenya panted, caught a toe and rebalanced by sheer willpower. He'd considered just borrowing the bus and driving back to UA, but he was probably faster than the bus over this distance, especially given that no one in his family really knew how to drive. Everyone told him to run, yelled at him to run, but still, he wasn't there, and if anything happened while he was gone it might as well be his fault. The bus ride hadn't seemed this long. Maybe he should have taken the vehicle despite his lack of driving experience, or maybe it was just his racing mind running laps around him that made this journey seem to last for. Casting a glance back, Tenya watched the USJ where his classmates and teacher fought for their lives against a villain sneak attack shrink far too slowly. He leaned forward, pushed himself to a higher gear. How had they, the villains, even known his class would be at the USJ? How had they known All Might was supposed to be with them? And now his classmates had been thrown through some dastardly black portal and he had no idea where they were or if they were hurt or even if no. He couldn't think like that. Everyone would be fine. Tenya sighted UA, the closest building at least, and the closest door. He had no time to go through more official channels. He would just shout for the nearest teachers. "Help!" he yelled, probably before anyone could hope to notice, let alone understand him, but seconds could be critical. Help! There's been an attack at the USJ. Tenya shouted again, slamming open the double doors in a most disrespectful fashion. He would regret it later, when he had time. A few curious heads poked into the hallway to see what the commotion was. Tenya ran down the hall, another disrespectful action to regret later, towards Principal Nedzu's office. Nedzu, keen-eared it seemed, was in the hallway waiting when Tenya skidded to a clumsy halt before him. "Sir, there has been an attack at the USJ. There are villains, dozens of them." Nedzu didn't question him, merely opened a hidden control panel in the wall and spoke into an intercom, his voice resounding through the building at thunderous volume. "Attention! Crisis response teams A and C to the USJ prepare for heavy enemy presence. Teams B and D remain vigilant for secondary attacks. Facilities are now on lockdown." A moment later, the hallways dissolved into a flurry of activity. Pros running for cars, some had motorized transportation on campus or just plain running. Metal shutters clattered as they covered windows, and the intruder alarm blared for the second time in as many days. Nedzu, who had briefly disappeared, reappeared, exiting a large closet in the driver's seat of what Tenya would call Nedzu's tank, for approximately 8 hours. When he told the tale to Tensei that evening, Tenya's older brother would dub it the UA Death Mobile. The UA Death Mobile was a sleek, silver tank completely coated in spikes and rockets. Nedzu grinned from behind the missile-proof glass, but the gleam in his eyes was sadistic rather than amused. Tenya was forgotten in the hustle, but he would never abandon his classmates. He slipped out the door behind midnight and took off with the horde of pros bound for the All Might. Flashed by a streak of gold soaring ahead of the pack. They would make it in time. They had to. The intruder alarm during lunch had been suspicious, but none of the teachers had considered it might culminate in something like this. Rescue training in the skyscraping USJ was usually a calm activity. This was just not Shuda's lucky year. The dark portal in the center of the USJ poured enemies into the midst of the training simulator. Shoyuta was too damn tired for this, and All Might wasn't here like he should be. Just him and 13 against dozens of villains? Those were wretched odds, but the consequences of failure were unthinkable. 13, protect the students. Shoyuta lunged down the stairs away from the firmly sealed main entrance. The first assailant fell to a single blow. The second flailed as she called on her non-existent quirk. He caught her in his scarf and slammed her into the pavement. There were dozens of them, never-ending waves of cannon fodder. What was the point of this? Even his untrained first years could handle themselves against this. There was a comforting thought. Shoyuta knocked 2 heads together with a resounding crack, ignoring the burning in his lungs, no time for that, and faced the last 2. The Warpgate villain was still harassing his class. Hopefully 13 was keeping that at bay. Hopefully someone had signaled for help. Any kind would do. The leader said they came to kill All Might. The leader and his bird-headed pet were the ones planning to do it, then. None of the cannon fodder stood a chance. "You're tiring," commented the hand-covered corpse villain. The bird monster waited, patient and silent. "Nomu, get him for me." It was fast for its size. Shoyuta vaulted over the Nomu's shoulder, landing just in time to avoid a punch in the gut. Erasing the Nomu's quirk did almost nothing. Options then? Running was off the table. What did that leave? Dying. The Nomu caught him, jerked him down as he tried to wrench himself free. Stupid, and now they were going to kill him, and then who knew how many of his students, and there would be absolutely nothing he could do about it, but first they were going to play with him. Maybe he could get them to draw it out, allow more time for help to arrive. With a whisper of mist, the warper appeared. Shoyuta squirmed, threw his weight, and listened to Shigaraki rage at an accursed student's escape. "Heaven, please let it be Ida." "Game over then," growled Shigaraki. "No, All Might, heroes on their way, a pile of unconscious small fry, but we'll leave them a message they can't ever wash away." Shigaraki reached forward and deftly placed his fingers, one by one, on Shuda's elbow. Someone had dunked his arm in molten lead. He stifled a howl, fixing Shigaraki with a withering stare. "Very impressive quirk, but I wonder how long you can keep your eyes open." Shigaraki placed his other hand on Shuda's forehead, smirking beneath his five-fingered mask. This was going to be a really horrid way to die, and who was going to teach his class presuming they were all still alive? They had to be, because he couldn't die unless they were all safe. Diamen, there were a lot of things he never got around to, and he even liked this class though he'd never admit it to them. He wanted to see them flourish. He wanted to see them graduate. Shigaraki reeled back, losing his grip as a foot smashed into his face. Shoyuta blinked gratefully, and found himself regarding a familiar head of translucent, green hair. "The hell are you?" growled Shigaraki as the boy before him snarled. Shoyuta realized, vaguely, that he'd never seen Specter physically hit someone before. He hadn't known for sure that the Vigilante could. What the hell was he doing here? Not that Shoyuta minded at the moment. Not being dead was always helpful, but did the kid not have parents or a school? Probably not. In retrospect, he acted like he was homeless. Shigaraki reached for Specter and Shoyuta flinched, preparing to activate his quirk, but Shigaraki reached right through Specter, who punched him, raking nails down the villain's face. Shigaraki grabbed his enemy's wrist, apparently still solid, but nothing disintegrated at his touch, like there was nothing there in the first place. Shigaraki snarled, then threw Specter half a dozen meters away. The boy winced in both pain and surprise as he rolled to a stop. Seemed he could be hurt after all. This was way below Specter's normal caliber of tricks, though. He never showed up in the day. Maybe he could only do this much in the sunlight. Specter got to his feet, charged right through Shigaraki's skillful block, whirled around and kicked the villain savagely in the kidney. Shigaraki growled, "Nomu! Kill both of these NPC pests." The Nomu gripped Shoyuta and rose to its feet. Specter pounced on the beast's hand, prying and biting at its fingers until the monster swatted the Vigilante away good 50 meters away. Specter rolled to a stop, struggling to stand, and All Might burst through the door smiling like a moron as always, but he looked distinctly unhappy. A burst of wind. Small fry villains flew in every direction. Shoyuta was freed. The savage fight between All Might and the Nomu began, Shigaraki cackling in glee and happily monologuing to the number one hero about just how the beast had been custom engineered to kill him. Multiple quirks? How could something have multiple quirks? Well, Todoroki had two, but that was extremely unusual. Regardless, Shoyuta could help with quirks, even if he was too light-headed to stand. A dozen seconds of erasure here and there quickly turned the tide of the fight. All Might would win promptly at this rate, something Shigaraki had noticed as well. The main villain's glare as he stalked toward Shoyuta could freeze a hot spring. "I should have dealt with you earlier." The world blurred as Shoyuta tried to stand. The arm wound bled like a sieve, the white bone showing through. If he played it right, he could trip Shigaraki and pin him on the ground, maybe. Specter appeared out of thin air like a firework on a cloudless night and smashed his elbow into Shigaraki's hand-covered face. There was an audible crack, and from the intensity of swearing that followed, it was Shigaraki's nose, not a finger on his hand mask, which broke. The Nomu went flying through the ceiling. Shigaraki screamed out a few more choice curses, pulling at his hair, before backing off. "Kurogyri!" The warper appeared. "Game over. Let's go." The two vanished and the USJ suddenly lapsed into silence. Shoyuta rolled to his side, vaguely aware of All Might vanishing into the trees. Moron needed to keep his injuries and time limit a secret, after all. Specter knelt by Shuta's side, pulling off strips of ruined cloth from the black sleeve Shigaraki had mostly disintegrated. The Vigilante bound them tightly about Shuta's bleeding elbow. Flames of protest screeched from the nerves in that arm, howling at every increase in pressure. "Not that I'm ungrateful for the bandages, kid," Shoyuta rasped. Then he sounded terrible. "But what do you think you're doing here?" Specter grimaced, blood dripping off his bangs, and whispered, "I wanted to hear 13 talk. I really admire them." The door of the USJ exploded open, a dozen furious heroes arriving at last. Specter, true to pattern, evaporated despite Shuta's growl of, "You get back here, kid." A moment later, All Might, deflated, crouched by Shuta's side, taking Specter's place, checking for more wounds. "Who was that boy with you?" the hero asked as he helped Shoyuta sit up. "Specter," Shoyuta muttered. He couldn't keep his words from slurring together. He sounded drunk. "He's a vigilante who follows me around sometimes." I can't stop him, or find him really. He vanishes without a trace whenever someone starts asking questions. All Might hissed under his breath, worrying a lip. He looked very familiar. You know who he is? Demanded Shoyuta, the dizzying haze clearing for a moment. He sounded less drunk than before. No, but I know I've seen him before, minus all the blood. Who did that to him? And now he ran off without any medical care. Shoyuta shook his head, then regretted it. All Might wasn't being an idiot right now. Well, he was, but he was being a reasonable idiot, worrying about the things a reasonable person would worry about, things which Shoyuta would worry about if he did not have all the facts. No. He always looks like that. It's his quirk. Well, I'm sure I've seen him before, minus his quirk. So maybe he looked normal in everyday life. Recovery Girl arrived and began scolding Shoyuta as she attended to his wounds. All Might laid him back down. Nedzu's distant voice declared all students were accounted for safe, and Shoyuta abruptly woke up in a hospital with only a vague idea of what year it was. Present Mike snored in a plastic chair, hand buried in Shuta's hair. What were the odds of meeting Kirishima here? From the raised eyebrow, Katsuki's classmate was thinking along the same lines. The bundle of blood-crimson roses in the redhead's arms dwarfed his chest. Maybe they could just keep walking, pretend this never happened. No such luck. Hey Bakugu. What do you want? Nothing, I just... He looked so sad. For heaven's sake, this was a graveyard. What kind of jerk? Was Katsuki growling and screaming in a place like this? Sorry. Don't mind me. He scuffed his boot in the grass, focusing on the acidic scent of last night's rain and not on Kirishima's face. It's all right, man. It's always a hard place to be. I snap at people thinking about why I'm here. The redhead paused, worrying a lip, then continued when Katsuki didn't tell him to shut up. My cousin, she was about my age, she passed 2 years ago. Leukemia, we used to do all kinds of things together, went to the same school and everything. Katsuki grimaced. He already knew enough sad stories. He didn't need to hear another one, but, well, Kirishima was different than most people. He wasn't fishing for pity here. He was just explaining that he understood, but he didn't. Not really. A dozen expressions must have flashed across Katsuki's face as he clutched the single daisy he'd brought. Kirishima looked at him with concern. Don't look at me like that. Kirishima knelt by the rough, gray headstone of a lonely grave and Katsuki winced. Sorry. I'm sorry for your loss. He wanted to smack himself. Maybe he should just tape his mouth closed and do away with all this tongue tripping. Maybe he could ask Shiro to do it for him at the start of every class. Kirishima knelt in silence for a time, then stood and followed after Katsuki, who had drifted towards another lonely grave, this one in the gloomy shade of a towering deciduous tree. Are you sure you're all right, man? Of course. Well, why was he saying any of this? We were friends when we were kids, and then we weren't friends and now he's dead. Midoriya Izu gazed up at the pair along with a short carving in the stone. May you find peace from your darkness. Katsuki laid down his daisy. It had been a grim funeral, a scant dozen acquaintances from school cowering behind their parents' legs as if to hide from some angel of vengeance. There wasn't one of them who hadn't laughed at, mocked, tripped, or otherwise tormented Izuku at least once. Auntie Inko's work friends had attended, as well as an old police detective and 2 baristas from a nearby cafe. The baristas remembered Izuku as the green ray of sunshine who came by once a week looking for a pair of interesting confections to share with his mother at Sunday breakfast. No teachers showed their faces, but one of the janitorial staff and all 3 of the cafeteria workers came. Izuku had always been sweet like that, acknowledging those who were forgotten, offering kindness to those no one else would speak to. Katsuki finally realized, hiding behind his mother's frame with his head cast down, that Izuku offered the outcasts kindness because he understood their loneliness and pain, because he didn't want anyone else to feel absolutely worthless like he did. Diminured. Couldn't he think of himself first for once? Why couldn't Izuku have been a selfish bastard like Katsuki? At least he'd still be alive, then. They could have sworn at each other and beat each other up in the hallways and shoved each other into lockers and generally been horrible to each other for a good 60 more years at least. Heaven help the outcasts. The priest who looked like an angel in her flowing, white dress said in a heavy tone that made it clear she'd overseen slightly different versions of this scene far too many times before, the ones we don't think about or talk about. The poor will always be with us, as will the outcasts. I ask you, in remembering a young life lost to despair, that you no longer turn a blind eye. That's rough, Kirishima was saying. There's a lot left unsaid between you, I'm sure. Sorry, man. It's not just that. Why should he tell Mr. Scarlet any of this? I was horrible to him. For years I was called him names, hit him, wrecked his stuff. Kirishima stared at Bakugo. What? Did he not believe it? Because he was just so DMN annoying, always saying he would be a hero even though he was a quirkless nobody, like he was somehow that good better than me. It was everyone, not just me. We all treated him like dirt and might as well spit it out. He killed himself. Jumped off the roof. Right after I humiliated him in front of the whole class. Right after I told him he'd be better off dead. Wind whispered through the leaves above them. 2 little birds screeched as they chased a hawk from its perch. Kirishima stared at the simple stone, waiting. Well? Katsuki growled. Come on. Say it. Tell him he's a murderer. Punch him in the nose. Do something. Someone ought to pay. Aizawa ought to find out and expel him. The police ought to hunt him down. He shouldn't get away with it. What do you want me to say, Bakugo? Asked Kirishima. What you did was messed up, but this was very clearly the last thing you wanted. Kirishima tactfully didn't mention the rogue tear on Katsuki's cheek. This was no place for a fistfight. I think I get you a lot better now, though. What's that supposed to mean? The way you snap and growl at people then suddenly apologize? If you'd made no effort to change after what happened, maybe I'd have something more to say. The pair turned away, walking quietly towards the distant, ivy-coated gate that designated the boundary between worlds. Across the lawn, a Catholic priest committed someone to the earth. What sort of life had that person lived that only 4 mourners came to acknowledge its end? After a spell of silence, Kirishima asked, Have you talked to anyone about this? Not me, I mean a professional. Katsuki didn't need a shrink. No, he said coldly. You should consider it, man. Mental health is as important as physical health, especially in our future profession. Heroes have it rough, man, and we can't do much good if we don't take care of ourselves. Why'd he have to be so dim and reasonable about it? Don't need a shrink. No, but you might find that you want one. There's no shame, you know. Wasn't there? That kind of thinking, that stigma, I guess, hurts a lot of people. I needed someone to talk to when my cousin died. Just be quiet now, Kirishima. Nothing unmanly about that, but though there was, and I was feeling really awful by the time my parents made me talk to someone. You really should think about it. Fine. Fine if you'll drop the subject now. Thankfully, Kirishima did. Do you think Mr. Aizawa will be back in class by Monday? Asked Kirishima as they stepped out from the ivy-coated archway and back into the land of the living. Course he will, Katsuki replied. Shoyuta blearily blinked his stinging eyes. Mike was gone, for better or for worse, and someone else had taken his place. Hospitals were just the worst. The sooner they let him out the better. Maybe he could escape. His arm didn't hurt much anymore. There was a window clouds drifted past. Was it locked? He could force a lock. A pair of misted, green eyes met his. I tire of asking this, but what are you doing here, Specter? Shuda's voice sounded as dead as Specter's gaze. I'm sorry, the kid whispered. I was there the whole time. I should have done something sooner, but I always try to keep out of the way. So the ghost child came to apologize to him for not being a proactive enough vigilante. What a royal mess. It wasn't Specter's responsibility to save Shoyuta, but trying to get that through the kid's transparent head would be like trying to drive a nail with a salmon. In the meantime, the kid had taken the silence for reprimand and hung his head in shame. Well, it was time to be a manipulative BSRD, or should it never get any answers. Answer some questions for me and I'll forgive you. He would need to wash his soul after this. Specter nodded glumly, tears mixing with the blood running down his cheeks. Best get this over with. What's your name, kid? Specter. No, your real name. I don't have one anymore. What was that supposed to mean? Maybe. What was your name when you had one? Specter hunched in on himself in shame. Okay, fine. Forget the name. Where are your parents, kid? My father left us when I was 5. My mother raised me, but she shouldn't have to deal with me anymore. Deal with him how? She kicked you out? She didn't have to. I made her miserable. I make everyone miserable. His voice broke into a rasping sob. And now what? Hey, stop that. Oh, very smooth, Shoyuda. Good job. Specter coughed. Sorry. Oh Lord. He was not paid enough to deal with this. What else was safe to ask? Where do you live then? Specter shrugged. Nowhere. You must stay somewhere. By the beach sometimes. In parks, in alleys, on top of buildings. A real street kid then. How do you eat? I don't. What? I don't. Part of my quirk. Here was a good follow-up. And just what is your quirk? Specter's eyes jerked up to meet Shuda's gaze. I'm a ghost. Specter seemed to think better of saying that and got up to leave. Stay, hissed Shoyuda. Specter worried his lip, furtively, glancing at the door and the walls. He was going to take off if Shoyuda pressed any more. Keep him here. Find a safe topic. Build a rapport. What did you think of the League of Villains? Specter's foggy irises caught a spark of life. What followed was 30 minutes of rambling which only had a structure when viewed from 1,000 meters up. The lightly bound web of information Specter dumped into the air included analysis of the fights, of the Nomu, of Shigaraki and Kurogiri's quirks, and of the League's psychology. The quirk analysis was very impressive and would have been more impressive if properly organized brilliant kid, but likely completely self-taught. Shigaraki was in charge nominally, but he was immature, kept talking as if life were a video game. He was likely being manipulated himself. He clearly wasn't the main villain behind the assault. Shoyuda had come to a similar conclusion. They have a sponsor, I think, someone big and nasty with foresight and as yet undisclosed motives. Kurogiri was too stable, too reliable to be anything other than a babysitter sent by the real boss to keep Shigaraki in line. Shigaraki reminded me of a mad dog, almost abused until all that remained was hatred. He certainly didn't have the DSPLN or foresight to make that Nomu or even find someone who could, and that can't have been an easy job just any genius could do. I've never even heard of such a thing as multi-quirk engineering, so someone clever decided this was a good idea, but it doesn't feel, with all the cannon fodder villains and only Kurogiri, Shigaraki, and the Nomu as capable combatants, that the real boss was even trying to make this work, but Shigaraki really believed he was on a mission to kill All Might. So maybe the real mastermind was using this as a publicity stunt? A trial run? Teaching experience? It's hard to say since we know nothing about who's really in charge. Sorry, I'm rambling again. No, it's fine. Interesting analysis. Very interesting. I think Principal Nedzu would like to speak with you. Specter jumped. All the enthusiasm replaced by fear. It was like dealing with a skittish rabbit. He doesn't bite, Specter, but he does like to analyze things. I think you two would get along swimmingly. The ghost did not look convinced. At the very least, I want to speak with you again. But I'm a vigilante. The police dash. We'll stay out of it. I'm pretty sure there's nothing anyone can do about you, anyway. Arresting a ghost is notoriously difficult. I saw the joke ending of the new Phantom of the Opera. The alternate ending had been funny enough to get him to smile. The police force had not succeeded in arresting the Phantom. There had been a similar joke in Ghostbusters 2040 which had been a terrible movie otherwise. Shoyuda still hadn't forgiven Hisashi for making him watch it when the Specter business heated up. Specter shrugged noncommittally. I'll be around. He vanished. I'm sure you will. Don't get yourself. Feel good. Specter tapped a finger idly on the cold metal bleacher as he watched the setup for the UA Sports Festival. He was in the stands long before they opened the gates, smugly lounging on his chosen seat, waiting for the madness to begin. He had watched the festival on television every year for half a decade, but it was a whole different experience to watch it in person. Sometimes his fate had perks. Specter's smugness was diminished by the awkwardness of the seat's paying patron sitting down on him, but he managed to find another, unoccupied seat before the events began. Kakin came in first in the obstacle course, closely followed by Todoroki, who Specter still sometimes called Shuto in his head. That was how they had been introduced, after all. Uraraka, Shinso, a crazed support student named Hatsum, and the Class 1B copycat, Monoma, who apparently didn't hate Uraraka as much as the rest of 1A, snatched the winning headband from Kakin at the last possible moment during the cavalry battle, Shinso somehow snake-charming the whole opposing team. Kakin and his compatriots Ida, Kirishima, and Tokoyami still advanced to the finals with points from their own raids. The crowd roared as Midnight cracked her whip and announced a break before the single combats began. Specter followed Class 1A down below the stands, stalking, or perhaps haunting, those he considered friends, although he'd never met any of them with the exception of Todoroki and Kakin. These in-person friends were the two he sought out, mostly just to see how they were doing. Following a flicker of firelight and sharp scent of smoke in the darkened hallways led Specter to an unpleasant conversation in an otherwise deserted corridor. Specter had never met Endeavor before, but he cut a distinctive figure, flames liking across his body in red-blue tongues. "You will never amount to anything if you don't get over this childish tantrum," Endeavor snarled. "You lost to a practically quirkless colleague, a girl who makes things float, a B-class maniac, and a support student. You have a duty to surpass All Might. Where do you think you'll get behaving as you do now?" Shuto, stony as ever, replied, "It's not a tantrum. I merely refuse to use a power you have poisoned. I'll win. I'll surpass everyone and I'll do it without your fire." "I'm disappointed in you," the number 2 hero shook his head. "I really thought you at least had potential." So these were the kind of conversations that sent Shuto to wander the streets in the dead of night. The dual-quirked student turned away and walked back towards the 1A preparation room. Specter followed Endeavor. "Hello." "Endeavor?" The brilliant grin of All Might appeared at the top of a stairway. Endeavor turned to him with a strong grimace. On his last morning alive, Izuku met All Might. Specter remembered the conversation now. All Might had been kind and reasonable as he answered Izuku's question after freeing him from the homicidal slime. Oh, he had said. Izuku couldn't be a hero without a quirk, but he was brave and resourceful, as evident by the fight he put up and his composure afterwards, and would likely make a fine police officer if he wished to pursue a career of civil service, but it was just another blow everything his peers liked to rub in his face repeated by the one he most admired. Specter didn't blame All Might for Izuku's fate any more than he blamed Kakin. It was Izuku's decision alone, but there was some echo of sour emotion now whenever he thought of either of them. The irony, certainly not lost on him, was that Specter now had a quirk, but still couldn't be a hero. Back in the real world, Endeavor responded to All Might's perfectly reasonable inquiry about his philosophy for training the next generation of heroes with a short, furious rant. "I don't need your pity." "What was that about?" "The next generation has been training for a decade already, Shuto first among them, and he is destined to surpass you. Your throne will not be safe for long. Want advice about teaching? Read a book." All Might's smile never faded, even as Endeavor stalked away, even as Specter growled to himself and followed the number 2 hero down another secluded hall. Enough of that. Shuto was a good person, and the way Endeavor was going, he'd end up a wrecked weapon like Shigaraki, stripped of emotion and pointed on target. The parallels were nauseating. The way Endeavor treated All Might would be uncalled for at a comedy roast of the number 1 pro. Sometimes people need a wake-up call. It was midday, but Specter could handle that much at least. Specter let the sound of his barefoot steps on the cold, metal corridor echo towards his target. Endeavor whirled around. "Who are you?" Specter didn't answer, merely spat out the words that came to mind. "What was it you said to yourself then? At your first sports festival? I'll show them. I'll prove myself. I'll make the world a better place." "I know you remember. Is it a better place, Endeavor, for what you do? What are you even dash? You sink your teeth just as viciously into the flesh of enemies as the flesh of allies. You abuse your family. You have no friends, only cronies. You will be number 1 soon enough, and you will still be number one when Tuya kills you. That got a reaction. You have bred weapons where you ought to have raised children. You will find it very lonely at the top when the only thing you love is a number. What would your poor mother have said, seeing how you treated Ray, seeing you king of nothing? The truly sad thing is you could have had it all, everything, if you hadn't wanted it so much. You have sold your soul. Remember that we'll always have this, no matter where our paths may wander. Specter wondered who he was quoting. You made that a lie. Enjoy your throne, live it up. The devil will have you soon enough, and there are many, many spirits in hell just dying to meet you. He let himself fade from view as he spat out 24 names. He recognized a few of them villains Endeavor had sent to their deaths. The number 2 hero had lost his flames, staring about the hallway in consternation before composing himself and swiftly walking towards the stands. Who was Tuya? Specter really would like to know. Maybe he could ask Shudo? No, that was probably a bad idea. Endeavor seemed like Kaken taken to the worst possible conclusion, so obsessed with winning and being the best that he lost track of the real world, forgot that other things could be important. Endeavor didn't seem to care about anything or anyone, not his family, not his country, not himself, loving only a number. Still, it had been petty to use the words on him, but Specter was sometimes petty. A few months on the wild side where society abandoned its write-offs would do that to you, and maybe it would do some good. Sometimes frightening someone with the threat of losing everything, even things they never realized they had, was enough to refocus their attention. Specter was a prime example of that. Lost everything and became a whole new person. But there was no real way to predict the effect the words would have, and it didn't matter because the real point of using them was just to make Specter feel better, to get a little revenge on Shudo's behalf. Anyway, the matches were about to start. The matches went about as expected. Todoroki and Kaken steamrolled the competition, although Monomahu had no issue with copying and using Todoroki's fire and Uraraka respectively gave nearly as good as they got. Shinso won his first match but lost to Silent Tokoyami. Kaken was clearly nervous, pulling punches and backpedaling in his fights, but winning them all, nonetheless, until it came to the final match. Shudo stood, shivering in place, stubbornly refusing to use a single lick of flame, and Kaken, not making any move to press his advantage and finish the fight, stood about 15 meters away and screamed at Shudo, bawling out progressively louder and stranger insults related to Shudo's refusal to use his fire. "Fight me like a real man, you demented steam locomotive," was one of the best. "You're a disgrace to tanning beds everywhere," was similarly amusing, as was, "Don't make me come over there, 'cause I will," if only in the physical context. Specter's childhood friend hadn't changed that much. Specter was not surprised by the insults, but they were much more creative and bizarre than he had expected. The match ended with a hypothermic Shudo and raving Kaken having a quirkless fistfight that lasted the better part of 10 minutes before both combatants collapsed in a pile of ice shards. Kaken, still screaming bizarre insults, then crawled out of bounds, giving Shudo the victory. Kaken's last comment on the matter was something along the lines of, "If you won't fight me for real, then neither of us deserve that medal." Present Mike stopped announcing. Halfway through the final match, apparently unsure of what to say. The only commentary was Mr. Aizawa's deadpan, "And now Bakugo is insulting his opponent. And now they are having a fistfight. Todoroki is now attempting to beat Bakugo unconscious with his torn shoe, which has just melted out of the ice. Now Bakugo also has a shoe to work with." It was brutal. And since when would Kaken forfeit a fight like that? He had been different lately, but the whole final fight was bizarre. "Come in," not like he was trying to sleep in his office or anything. The door didn't open, rather Specter stepped right through the stained oak just as if he were a normal, incorporeal student coming to speak to his instructor. "What is it, problem child?" Just what he needed today. "I'm worried about Ida," Specter said. Well, that was a new one, but with all the horrid business with Tensei being maimed by the hero killer, there might be grounds to worry. "And just why are you worried about him?" "He's been isolating himself from his friends." "Just how much time did the ghost spend in Shuda's class? Was he always sitting there on someone's desk listening, or maybe taking notes on some ghostly paper?" "And I saw the internship he selected, it's Hosu, and I can't help but think he's planning to chase after the hero killer himself." I can imagine, he murmured, how I'd feel if my brother were crippled. I doubt I'd be thinking rationally. Did Specter mean he had a brother, or was he just a particularly empathetic individual? Shoyuta sighed again, rubbing his eyes. Revenge didn't sound like Ida, but Ida didn't sound much like Ida right now, either. I'll keep an eye on him, and I suspect you will too. Specter smiled shyly. Well, I have a question for you. Mind telling me what you said to Endeavor? Shoyuta never liked the number 2 hero. All Might was a loud moron, but Endeavor was a cold, temperamental glory hound which was worse. However, Shoyuta had received an unusual call from the walking flamethrower about a week after the sports festival. Endeavor wanted to know if the things Specter tells people are true. From his tone, it was evident that the answer he was looking for was no, but Shoyuta had no idea. He might be the person to call about anything related to Specter, but he had no clear idea of how the littlest Vigilante's quirk worked. Specter blinked, trying to recall a fuzzy memory. All kinds of things. Why? He was being a bully. That sounded like Endeavor all right. You actually scared him. Specter narrowed his eyes. I meant to. How did you know what to say? A familiar, blood-dripping shrug. My quirk tells me. That explained it. The kid didn't understand what he'd said, just knew to say it. Are the things you say true then? Specter tilted his head, thinking, or rather organizing months' worth of thoughts. I think everything I say has the potential to be true from the perspective of the person I address. Some things might be lies, but the person I am addressing cannot prove them false. So, if I say something about a person's past, then that, usually, must be completely true because that can easily be proved true or false. If I say something about the present, it needs to appear to be true from the listener's perspective as I speak. If I say something about the future, this is mostly speculation. It needs to be potentially true, but I don't think it has to be true. I think it's like a prophecy, sort of, which may not come to pass if people change, or if unlikely things occur. That explained why it was so terrifying, perhaps. The truth is often more frightening than fiction. But your predictions often are true. Specter nodded. Some are harder to confirm than others, of course, but I once told a mugger he was going to be hit by a bus. He took off running before I even realized what I'd said. I chased him because he was running out into a major street, self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess. I felt horrid, but he didn't die, at least not at the scene. Specter shuddered. Shoyuta would not have to lecture him about being careful with excessive force, then. Shoyuta might need to lecture him about not blaming himself for accidents he could not have anticipated. There was someone else who he told him his cat didn't really love him and would leave soon. A day later it ran away. Clearly someone didn't know how to properly pamper a cat. Back on topic. And what did you say to Endeavor that made him call me in the middle of the night? Specter squinted. Did this not leave a clear memory somehow? It could be a side effect of his quirk. Maybe he could never clearly recall what he had said using this power. I told him he would be number 1 soon, but he wouldn't like it. That didn't sound particularly disturbing. And I said he would still be number 1 when Tuya killed him, but I don't know who Tuya is. Shoyuta did, though, and a bleeding ghost prophesizing your death at the hand of your son was certainly enough to give most people nightmares, and now Shoyuta would have to call Endeavor back and tell him that even Specter didn't know for sure, but everything the ghost had said was probably true. That would be a horrid conversation. Nedzu would indeed like to speak with you sometime, kid. Specter hesitated, thinking. The kid clearly trusted Shoyuta more now, but did he trust him enough to agree? All right, though I really don't understand why he'd want to speak with me. Oh, but Shoyuta did. Specter was interesting, and Nedzu could never leave something interesting uninvestigated or unharassed in many cases. After internships are over, I am sure you can find the time. Of course, sir. Thank you and goodbye. Goodbye, Specter. The ghost stepped out through the door. Well, it was a step up from just vanishing into thin air. Specter's existence really did strongly depend on his expectations. For instance, his current answer to, "What does it mean to be a ghost?" would vastly affect his day-to-day life? Afterlife? It was midday, and Specter had come down from the tree where he had been dozing and set off to search out some ice cream. Having reasoned that, though he had no need of food, he should be able to taste food given that all his other senses remained unchanged, Specter had found that he could, indeed, put food in his mouth and swallow it. He could enjoy the flavors and textures as if he weren't even dead. He did feel stronger afterwards, too, and the energy from the calories had to go somewhere, so he assumed there was some benefit to eating every now and again. Today, Specter wanted ice cream and, having found a crumpled and dust-crusted bill someone happened to drop on the sidewalk a few days previously, he could have some. Concentrating on forcing his figure to become entirely tangible that was still hard, he fetched a torn hoodie and a pair of sandals from a hollow in his tree and pulled them on. His clothes, the blood-stained ones, behaved like a part of him. He'd think he'd remove them, but then they'd still be there and he would find nothing but air in his grip. An alternate solution to conceal his gory appearance had been found. If he made himself completely solid, he could haphazardly throw larger clothes over himself, hiding all the blood and broken bones and keeping the questions at bay. The ripped hoodie that Specter pulled on advertised some technical college that he had never heard of. He had fetched it and his California-style sandals from a charity donation bin. He felt a little guilty for taking them, but he really did need them. The ghost stepped into a long line in front of his favored snack shop and liked his lips. He could really use some sugar. Over the past week, Specter had worn himself out the fatigue, a strange, numbing feeling. His nights were spent stalking relentlessly through Hosu, watching vigilantly for Ida or Stain. By day, Specter wandered and rested, keeping an eye on other 1A students with nearby internships. He wasn't worried about any of them, not really, but it was fun to watch them, pretending he were one of them. Class 1A were all his friends, even if they didn't know it. Well, maybe not Mineta. Mineta was creepy sometimes. Jiro kept stealing his pens during class, and the short boy deserved it. It was Specter's turn to order. "Strawberry, please." He kept his head in the shadow of his hood and his twisted, broken hand out of sight as he passed the bill across the concession stand. "There you go." The vigilante collected his scant change and cone, thanking the attendant before weaving away through the crowd which had collected about the little creamery cart. The crisp, fiery scent of sugar in the air never failed to attract customers. That scent was how you knew it was going to be good ice cream. Specter lapped the fruity sugar off the cone, trotting away down the sunny street. He didn't have the right to be this happy, but he couldn't help enjoying this. Any more than he could help how miserable he had often felt for the last, some odd years. In the park at his right, two little girls chased each other up and down a plastic climbing wall playing heroes and villains. One of them was being All Might, the other some version of Godzilla. Because why would someone play a real villain? That was creepy. One of them giggled, imitating the number one's catchphrase. Kaken used to chase Izuku around like that. Those were good times. Back then, Izuku never felt guilty about enjoying his ice cream. His very presence didn't make people miserable. His parents were better off without him. It had been ages since he'd seen his mother, and what did his father even look like? Couldn't quite recall anymore. Glasses? Dark hair? There he was, thoroughly miserable now, so there was no need to feel guilty about these last few bites of ice cream. Specter liked the last, sticky drops of sugar off his fingers. Now, back to his tree, then on to see Tokoyami-Deku? Specter snapped his gaze up to meet the piercing red eyes of his childhood friend. Kaken's hair was comically styled, especially when combined with his slack jaw and eyes wide with disbelief. To his left, Best Jeanist, who really was fantastically amazing, spoke to an enthusiastic boy with silver hair. "Oh, this was really bad. This was terrible. What were the odds?" Specter could find new clothes. He let himself vanish, losing tangibility. His sweatshirt fell through him, tumbling to a heap on his sandals. With any luck, Kaken would just believe he was seeing things. Best Jeanist hadn't seen Specter, after all. He could hightail it into the park, lurk there, and come back for his clothes once the excitement associated with the pro's presence died down. His intern was not quite what he'd expected. Tsunagu had expected a mad dog, someone who needed to be tamed and taught not to bite a friendly hand, but he found himself dealing with a deeply frightened individual, scarred by something that left him second-guessing every instinct even while lunging, snapping, and snarling. Tsunagu was no licensed psychiatrist, but no degree was necessary to realize there was something very wrong going on here. Best Jeanist bid goodbye to a silver-haired child who had begged for an autograph and found his intern pale as a snowman, standing still as a scarecrow. A red and brown leaf had blown onto the teenager's head, giving him a comical and unnoticed hat. "Bakugu! Did you see him?" came the strangled reply. "A villain?" Tsunagu scanned the street. Nothing out of the ordinary. "Who? Where?" Bakugu coughed. "He was there." The blonde pointed to an abandoned sweatshirt and sandals lying on the sidewalk. "And then he vanished." "Who?" It almost did look like someone had vanished out of their clothes, but Tsunaga had seen plenty of stranger things lying in the street, and why just a sweatshirt and shoes? "A ghost," Bakugu said, still impersonating a marble statue. "Well, I swear it was him. I'd swear it on his grave." Interesting phrase. Tsunagu could see it catching on in certain, very specific circumstances. "Who? Just spit it out already." "Deku. I mean, Midoriya Izuku. He was my classmate in middle school." A few concerned pedestrians trotted by, shooting the pro-hero and apprentice sidelong glances while Bakugu decided what to say. "He killed himself." "Well, that was the end of this patrol. Time to go home. When the interns start seeing their dead classmates, it's time to take them back to the agency." "All right, we're headed in." He grabbed Bakugu firmly by the shoulder and steered him back along their route, texting one of his sidekicks to take over the rest of the patrol. The explosion wielder paced in silence, shivering slightly even in the sun, hands tucked into his pockets. It was certainly possible that Bakugu saw someone with an illusion or hallucination quirk, maybe even a villain playing tricks on him, or that he saw his dead compatriots near-perfect doppelganger who panicked at the unexpected attention and bolted, but given the context it seemed more likely that Bakugu had just imagined Midoriya Izuku dredging up a nightmare from some pit of unresolved trauma. Tsunaga knew that feeling all too well. Tsunaga dragged his still-shaken intern into an elevator which played some kind of irritating pop song at them, then out of an elevator, then into a dimly lit conference room and closed the door. The fluorescent light buzzed. A water cooler bubbled in the corner. The whole place smelled like musty paper. It was the perfect atmosphere for secret meetings. "So," Tsunaga began. Bakugu shook his head. "I know, okay, it couldn't have been him. I know he's dead. I'm not delusional, but dash." He slammed his mouth shut. Tsunaga waited. "But just for a second I was so dim and sure it was him." The hero student rubbed his forehead. "I'm not crazy. There just must have been someone who looked a lot like him, some other green-haired kid." "Really? Fine. We didn't need to come back." The pro considered his charge. "No, we didn't need to come back. We are in a dangerous profession, Bakugu. There's no room for emotional turmoil out on the streets." Bakugu growled, glaring at Tsunaga. "Listen to me. Don't growl. In this line of work, we all have seen things no one should see, lived through events that haunt us for years. That is, unfortunately, a part of our lives. If you let things fester, however, that can become a serious problem. I have no idea who or what you saw, if anything, but it is evident to me that the fate of your classmate has deeply affected you, and I think you know that too." Tsunaga's intern was not stupid, that was evident. Stubborn, rash at times, but very clever. Bakugu hunched his shoulders and turned away. "It was ages ago," he said lamely, like that changed anything. The student shifted and clenched a fist. "If I'd just been nice to him for one goddamn day." Tsunaga winced. "You have no idea what would have happened or if you could have changed anything at all. I know the world of might-have-beens very well. It is no place to live your life. What if he'd been there 5 minutes earlier? Who could he have saved? What if he had been there 5 minutes later? Who would have died? What if he hadn't taken an offered hand when he knew there were strings attached? That world was haunted by the smiling images of the dead and bloodied ghosts of the living. Tsunaga saw it in nightmares and bitter daydreams on rainy evenings. "It was my fault," the intern yelled, eyes flashing with the distant reflection of hellfire, not Endeavor's quirk, actual hellfire. What am I even doing here? Tsunaga couldn't answer that. You tell me. Bakugo growled, working teeth through a lip. I don't know. I always said I was going to be a hero and everyone else always said I was going to be a hero for 10 DMN years. Ever since I got my quirk, everyone's been saying that, and what else would I do? I've always wanted that, to be the best, to prove it, show the world. But sometimes I feel like my whole life reads more like a first-rate villain's backstory than a first-rate hero's. This might be above Tsunaga's pay grade, but Bakugo, for all his rough edges and explosive personality, was straightforward and honorable. It was impossible to imagine him cheating on a test, breaking a promise, or taking something he hadn't earned, for example, first place at the sports festival. You would make a lousy villain, third-rate at best. Hey, wait. Tsunaga hid his smile as Bakugo tried to work out if that was an insult or a compliment. In all seriousness, I think it important, at this point, that you speak with a mental health professional. The bleach blonde glared, then sighed. Kirishima said the same thing. Tsunaga recalled the name vaguely from the sports festival. Your friend gives good advice. I don't want idiots thinking I'm broken or something, the intern muttered. Tsunaga resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Society was savage like that, he knew all too well. Show one little tear in your fairy tale life and the press would eat you alive. First, you don't have to tell anyone. Second, why do you care what people think? You never seem to have any problem being yourself. Bakugo snorted. Contrary to popular belief, I do actually understand that public imagines can be important. Tsunaga raised an eyebrow. I'm not stupid. I am aware of that. Fine. I'll talk to someone. I have suggestions if you are interested. Tenya had never wanted to kill anyone before. It wasn't a good feeling, but it was insistent, a curling, vice-like grip that squeezed him as he dodged through the UA halls by day and as he tossed and turned in his bed by night. It was like a living thing that used him, drank his blood, sapped his strength, chilled his heart, turned him away from the concerned gazes of his parents, Uraraka, Azui, and Yaoyorozu. He didn't need pity, or help, or a listening ear. He needed revenge, and he'd have it. Manuel, his mentor in Hosu City, saw right through him, of course. He might as well have written his intentions on a cardboard sign and stapled it to his face. All Manuel's words ran off him like water off steel. Tenya couldn't rest until someone paid. The hero killer preferred to work in dark little corners, like a cockroach. Amidst the chaos of Hosu, stricken by the arrival of Nomus and the rise of looters, Tenya slipped away from Manuel and made for the realm of cockroaches. He kept to the shadows. He, too, was a criminal at the moment, but he was in the right. And when this was over, that unspeakable feeling would finally go away, rotting with stain in Tartarus, or perhaps a graveyard. Either would do. Tenya slunk deeper into Hosu's shadiest district, watching every rooftop and shadow. One of the shadows moved. Tenya fell back into a fighting stance, but this wasn't the hero killer. A wall of mist filled the alley as the boy stepped closer. Tenya kept his fists raised, heart pounding like a brass band in his ears. Who are you? Tenya snapped. The boy stepped out of the fog he had summoned and let it melt away. The bloodied, walking corpse of a teenager pet his head, fluffy, green hair falling towards his shoulder. Tenya took a step back. Specter, Tenya answered his own question. The Vigilante was a common conversation topic among his classmates ever since Mr. Aizawa mentioned him once in class. This had been taken as a confirmation of the rumor that Specter followed Eraserhead on patrols and picked off the stragglers. What are you doing here? Specter ped his head to the other side. I could ask you the same thing, but from one vigilante to another, the answers seem pretty clear. I'm not a vigilante. Tenya yelled back. Were the answers clear? You weren't yesterday, but you are now, Specter sighed. I'm not going to chew you out for doing something illegal. Heaven knows I don't have the moral high ground there. I am going to chew you out for doing something stupid and cruel. Before Tenya could protest, the ghostly figure continued. Your brother had a decade of experience on you and still lost. You can't reasonably think you can win alone, so you are going out to look for a fight where Stain is going to kill you. How did Specter even know who he was? Let alone what he was doing here? Tenya took another step back. And that is unspeakably cruel. Do you know what that would do to your brother? Your parents? Your classmates? Your teacher? What you're doing is selfish, putting your pain above everyone else. Specter hung his head as Tenya stared on in shock because he didn't want to admit Specter might have a point, several points. Take it from me. Dying doesn't solve any of your problems. What? Was the vigilante implying he was actually dead? No matter. That didn't make any sense, anyway. You don't understand, Tenya snarled. How could this crazy vigilante understand him? Tenya barely understood himself. I have to do this. I have to avenge him. It's my job, no one else's. Now get out of my way. Tenya stepped forward. Specter narrowed his hazy eyes. Don't make me go get Eraserhead because I will. I won't see you on the same path as me. You and your friends deserve better. Ida pushed past the ghost. Fine. I warned you. Given the chaos in Hosu, what were the odds Specter could even find Tenya's teacher? As he discovered 10 minutes later, the odds were pretty good. Ida, snarled a voice from the dark, and Tenya whirled around, ready to run, but a white scarf wrapped around his chest, pinning his arms, and his quirk refused to respond to him. Aizawa glared red daggers at Tenya. Behind the teacher, Specter looked on with an expression of terror and despair. Perhaps Tenya had taken up the same expression, for he also felt that way. Give me one good reason, growled Aizawa, not to drag you back to manual, call your brother to scream at you, and then expel you, and retroactively expel all of your extended family members as well. Ida didn't have a reason. Aizawa should probably do it. But expel him. See if he cared. If Aizawa wasn't his teacher anymore, what grounds would he have to keep Tenya from his duty? The Eraserhead waited, sighed, and dragged his student down the alley, boots scuffing on the asphalt. Unfortunately, the pro grumbled, I have a good reason not to do that. What? Tenya was already halfway through rethinking his career and vengeance plans, or was he just in denial? Because if I toss you out and leave you to your own devices, you're certainly going to get yourself killed, and heaven help me, I do care, and so do Tensei, Uraraka, Azui, and the rest of your troublemaking classmates. The pro snorted and muttered something that might have been meddling kids. Tenya fought down a wave of angry tears, turning his face from Aizawa's crimson gaze. It's for you. Tenya started as Eraserhead pressed a phone into his hand. Hello. Tenya said hesitantly, voice cracking. Tenya. Tensei. Oh hell, Aizawa hadn't been kidding about calling his brother. Not that Aizawa ever kidded. Logical ruses were not the same thing as kidding, but it was the middle of the night and Tensei should be resting. You know I love you, right? Yes. But now please, stop being a suicidal maniac. Tenya started. His brother didn't normally speak quite like that. Tensei's voice slurred with pain medication and exhaustion. But I have to dash. No. You don't. It's not right and it's not fair. I feel that more than you can believe, every second of every day, but you know what would be more unfair? Losing my brother too, along with everything else. What was that noise? Tensei was sobbing. Tenya's eyes flew wide as he desperately yelled broken sentences, looking for words of comfort even though he didn't have any positive emotions left to draw from. Can you imagine, Tensei whispered, if you were me? If you woke up one day in an opioid haze to see on the news that the same person who nearly killed you had murdered me? Because I was trying to avenge you? Can you imagine how that would feel? Tensei was not whispering anymore. Tenya held the phone away from his ear to protect his hearing and found that he was crying now, too, because he could imagine he'd tasted plenty of despair in the past weeks. Do you know how terrified I am right now just imagining this? Tenya choked out a dozen blubbered apologies, one after another. Come back, Tenya, Tensei said, and leave some of your misery in Hosu. I want to see you smile again someday, really smile, not just move your lips, and I want my funeral to be before yours, not after. Okay, Tenya said hoarsely. Aizawa took his phone back while Tenya stood trembling. Eraserhead steered his student back through the streets of Hosu to his hotel, stopping briefly to place a call to Manuel and explain the situation. Aizawa would have to leave again, plunge back into the burning chaos of Hosu, but not before making Tenya swear on his and his brother's life that he would only leave his hotel room if it is unsafe to remain, for example if the building is on fire, before promising, in a tone usually reserved for threatening someone's continued existence, to return for him the next day. Tenya threw himself on the double bed, stared at the gray, popcorn ceiling, listened to distant emergency sirens, and replayed Tensei's words again and again. Sometimes Aizawa's and Specter's mixed in. He couldn't sleep. Every moment spent in this semi-rational headspace was filled with regrets. How could he be so stupid? Specter was right to... He'd been cruel, not thinking of others. Every time he closed his eyes he saw his own death being reported by the bleach-blonde news anchor who did the morning headlines for Channel 6. Eventually, as morning dawned, if only to convince himself his morbid fantasies weren't real, he found the scratched old remote and turned on the television. He flipped to Channel 6 and froze, all emotion in his body converted to the same kind of overwhelming dread terror as when he got that horrible call during the sports festival. Stain apprehended. Student and pro gravely wounded, read the ticker. The bleach blonde elaborated in her horribly bubbly voice. The hero killer, Stain, was apprehended last night during the attacks on Hosu City, his capture attributed to number 2 hero Endeavor. Pro-hero native and Endeavor's youngest son, Todoroki Shudo, a first-year intern from UA, were both injured in the confrontation. Reports on native's condition indicate he will make a full recovery. Todoroki Shudo was reportedly gravely wounded and some sources report that he is not likely to survive, but this cannot be confirmed. Tenya sank to the floor with his head in his hands. After perhaps 30 minutes spent completely incapacitated by the overwhelming, crashing waves of mixed emotions, Tenya dialed a number that he thought might be Aizawa's and asked something along the line of, "Please tell me she's an idiot," which probably made little sense out of context, but Tenya's teacher had seen the news, too, and figured out what he was asking soon enough. Specter smashed a looter in the head with a telekinetically thrown 2x4 then rested, panting. After he fetched Eraserhead to talk Ida down from his own personal rooftop, the ghost dived into the madness which was Hosu City. He was really an ambush predator. He didn't work well in long, drawn-out confrontations. His quirk exhausted him quickly if he didn't take breaks between exertions, but he couldn't just sit down and watch Hosu burn and people steal from and abuse each other, so he pushed himself. He made it rain on a house fire, driving his weather manipulation to the absolute limit. He threw things at villains until he was too tired for that and had to settle for punching them. Then he heard the screams. Someone else heard them too, so Specter and Shudo made their way to the hero killer's chosen alley at more or less the same time. "Stay out of this, kids," growled the crimson-clad villain, and good lord he had a terrifying presence. Specter himself was scary, but this was another level. The knight seemed to collapse in a cloak around Stain as if he were some sort of supernatural force rather than a man. Specter edged towards the unconscious form of the pro-hero native, but it wouldn't do any good. He was too tired to carry the man either with telepathy or with his hands. He kept phasing through things without meaning to. He could barely make his eyes focus. Shudo wordlessly swept a cascade of ice in Stain's direction. It coalesced with an almost musical clatter as if all the members of a 100-piece orchestra had fallen down in synchrony. The villain dodged effortlessly, vanishing for a moment before reappearing as he sprung from the opposite wall of the alley. "You're Endeavor's kid, aren't you?" Shudo stiffened. "Back off or die." Specter tried to throw a nearby chair, but found any attempt at telekinesis futile. He could barely hold a physical form properly. Neither the villain nor the student bothered to look at him. "Shudo, you need to run," said Specter. Shudo glanced at the ghost with vague recognition. "No. Oh hell. Shudo was going to get himself killed. Please. You can't save Native if you're dead. Grab him and run. It might be possible." Shudo fended off another charge. "No. I won't lose. I won't lose this chance." His friend was going to die. And what could Specter do about it? Exhausted as he might be, no sword could touch him, and perhaps he couldn't touch Stain, but Specter could speak to him. The hero killer gave Specter a curious look, stepping through the ghost casually as Shudo tossed an ice shield between himself and the other two combatants. Specter opened his mouth, calling on the words that always hovered within his grasp, ready to send. Anyone, be they petty thugs or top 10 heroes, crying to their mothers. He reached and found nothing. It was as if he attempted to exhale with no air in his lungs. What? Stain smirked as he caught a glimpse of the stunned expression on Specter's face. I don't know what you just tried to pull, kid, but it didn't work now, did it? With another chuckle, Stain turned away. How could there be no words? Was this just due to exhaustion? That had never happened before, not even on the longest patrols. Was it possible that someone like Stain, someone who held that unbreakable aura of malice, was simply not afraid of anything? That he had fallen so far into some pit of anarchistic mania that no figment of the past, illustration of the present, or prophecy of the possible future could shake or sway him? Stain's silhouette, dark against the reflected firelight of burning Hosu, brought a deep chill to Specter's blood he had thought only the living could experience. The Vigilante couldn't fight, couldn't win, couldn't even help, so what could he do? Find someone stronger. Specter ran, crying for help as he did so, but everyone he passed there were few enough was busy with another emergency. Endeavor had to be around here somewhere, right? Shudo had been with him. Specter screamed at the pro, a snarling man engulfed in flames and rage, yelling that he found Shudo, that he found Stain, then turned on his heel and fled. As Specter ran back to that horrid little alley, he didn't dare look to see if Endeavor followed. He might be too late already anyway, and what would Specter do if the number 2 hero really had ignored him? Nothing. The ghost hadn't done enough, but this would have to do. Stain stood stark red against the shadows, sword inches from Shudo's back, and Specter tackled him, scratching, biting, kicking, anything to buy a few more seconds. Stain tossed him aside like trash. Endeavor roared into the fray like Satan himself plunging into battle. Specter extricated himself from the garbage bag prison into which Stain had flung him and pulled on Shudo's shoulder, scrabbled really since his hands kept phasing through his friend's flesh, and panicked at the ugly gash gaping like an open maw across Shudo's chest and stomach. Staunch the bleeding. There was a cushion from an abandoned chair that could staunch the bleeding, but demon it wouldn't stay in his hands, and how much blood had Shudo already lost? It was everywhere. The air reeked of iron. Someone hit the ground and the shouts and roars of combat ceased. Endeavor snatched the pillow from Specter's hands and roared some question or other, but the look in the fiery hero's eyes was terror, not rage. Specter was barely aware of the brief conversation with the pro that followed, and even less aware as he trudged towards the hospital, chasing the retreating lights of an ambulance. He was in good company when he arrived. The wards, waiting rooms, and parking lot were overflowing, the air saturated with sobbing. Specter kept having to move to new seats in the hospital's waiting room. No one could see or feel him, so they sat on him, which was weird. Then Specter got up and left. It happened a few dozen times before Specter finally got the idea to sit on top of a vending machine. No one sat on him there. It was a hectic night at the hospital. Thousands had been injured in Hosu, and the waiting rooms were cacophonic orchestras of frantic voices except near Endeavor. The number 2 hero waited stoically in a corner, face stony and chin in his hands, while everyone nearby whispered, usually something along the lines of, "Why is Endeavor here?" Specter watched the flame hero place calls to Fuyumi, Natsuo, and finally, hesitantly, to Rei. Fuyumi and Natsuo arrived within 2 hours. The former was sobbing. The latter looked ready to start a public shouting match, gritting teeth and snarling, but Endeavor shot him a pleading look, and Natsuo sat down abruptly, a puppet with the strings cut, looking shocked. Perhaps he'd never seen that expression from Endeavor before? Others Specter knew began to arrive shortly thereafter. First was Aizawa towing Ida. Uraraka arrived next and immediately hugged Ida, then commented on how unspeakably awful he looked. The class president did look like a zombie, pale and red-eyed. Yayarozu arrived half an hour later, looking utterly bewildered. Kirishima followed. He didn't look confused, he looked terrified. Bakugu appeared last, accompanied by Best Jeanist, who nodded solemnly to his fellow heroes before settling in beside his intern. Said intern wore an expression constantly twisting between terror, rage, and disbelief. Kaken muttered something under his breath. "What?" asked Uraraka, glaring at the explosion wielder. Why was she glaring? Kaken gave a pitifully half-hearted glare of his own, then relented. I said, "Good gods, if you have any mercy at all, don't let me lose another classmate." Wait, did he mean Izuku? What did you think I said? Uraraka winced. Never mind. I'm sorry. Kakin grunted and looked pointedly away. It had been more than 12 hours since Specter arrived when a doctor finally trudged out to tell Endeavor that his son was alive but unlikely to stay that way. Half the waiting room paled. Some whimpered. Specter took advantage of his incorporeal status to howl like a banshee. After everything he did, everything he tried to do, he was still a worthless waste of space, couldn't even keep his friends alive. Endeavor and Shudo's older siblings followed the doctor into the ICU. Aizawa pinched his nose, sighing so deeply Specter swore the world shook. It's time for us to head home, he informed his students. Everyone began to protest. There is nothing to do here but drive yourselves mad worrying. The instructor looked pleadingly at Best Jeanist, who blinked, nodded, and aided Aizawa in shepherding his class out of the hospital. Specter stayed. He had made extensive inquiries, often at times when he would rather have been sleeping. Villains were experts at trash talk. Enji never listened. Usually, his enemies never had the chance to talk. He was good at his job. No one dared deny that, not that smiling idiot, All Might, not the press, not his family. He never let anyone or anything get to him, but somehow the words "a blood-soaked child" hissed to him in the dark hallways beneath UA's festival stuck in his mind like glue. He ignored them for a whole week. Anyone could know about Tuya's disappearance. It was in plenty of public records. The rest, maybe the kid just guessed, but the words refused to fade. The only thing you love is a number. You could have had everything if you hadn't wanted it so much. You will still be number one when Tuya kills you. Enji had seen that last scenario plenty of times now in shadowy nightmares, a scarred figure clad in blue fire staring down at him with hyena eyes. You have bred weapons where you should have raised children. Enji began his inquiries with midnight web searches and finished his inquiries at stupid o'clock in the morning with a phone call to Aizawa Shoyuda. Specter, though well known in certain circles, was by no means better known than any of the secretive underground heroes who attempted to track him, and Endeavor had, at first, no idea who it was that had stalked him down beneath UA. An internet search for green-haired ghost student UA had turned up nothing, so he was out of luck on that front. Replacing student with villain provided many articles about a nasty piece of work serving life in Tartarus. Replacing villain with hero was close enough for the search engine to turn up a variety of useless garbage, and one brief blog post about Specter, a vigilante called a hero by some. From there, it was not difficult to find out who would know something at least about the transparent menace. Unfortunately, Eraserhead hadn't known a thing about Specter's prophetic ramblings. Even more unfortunately, the underground hero eventually learned the answers to Enji's questions. The prophecies are likely all true, the exhausted voice told him over the phone. Everything Specter told you has the potential to be true. It's likely that his predictions about the future are subject to change. Enji didn't know how to respond to that. He wanted to say something cutting, something to distract himself from the feeling of the ugly pit spreading through his chest. Feelings like that were useless, distractions, weaknesses, but sometimes when he closed his eyes, "Is the world better for what you do?" still echoed through his mind. Of course it was. What kind of question was that? And yet, he ended his conversation with Aizawa not with a growl but with a short, "Thank you for your help. Good night." Enji thought he heard Eraserhead mutter, "I wish it were a good night," as he hung up, but the flame hero couldn't be sure. What now then? Enji tried to find Tuya. He couldn't put the motivation into words, but he needed to find his child now. He had never stopped keeping an eye out for Tuya, but he had long since given up on actively searching. After the sports festival, he brought Cold Trails back to life. However, some people won't turn up no matter how many resources you throw into finding them. Days ran by like stand in an hourglass and internships began. Shudo paced behind Enji grudgingly. Given their more recent interactions, Enji wasn't sure why his youngest had chosen to intern with him. Perhaps it was solely a matter of prestige. That was logical enough. The sun had long since set and it was time to head back to the agency. Endeavor didn't work much at night. The real heavy hitters, The truly dangerous villains that called for his attention were more often active in the day because they wanted to be seen. The media hounds were always the worst, killing and maiming just for a prime spot on the evening news. NG gritted his teeth at the impolite inner voice which pointed out that he might fit the description of a media hound every bit as well as the criminals he fought. Endeavor's earpiece crackled. "Boss, you need to take a look at this." The city exploded into chaos. As if the Nomu weren't bad enough, small-time villains took the opportunities provided by the anarchy running rampant in flaming Hosa City to carry out some full-scale pillage. Not all of the small-timers were pushovers, so NG wrestled a 30-foot python woman to the ground with considerable difficulty, burning her enough to keep her in line as some nameless pro-hero cuffed her. If Endeavor had known it was going to be this dim and bad, he'd have sent Shudo back to his hotel room. Wait, where was Shudo? The storefront of a jewelry shop exploded in a tangle of glass, all of which melted at NG's behest long before it could do him any harm. The flame hero tackled the villain responsible, smashing the man's head into the sidewalk. "Did you ever choose the wrong store?" he muttered to himself. Any other shop in the entire city and the moron would likely have gotten away with the robbery, but the unlucky idiot just had to leap into the street and land within reach Endeavor. From the muffled groan which sounded something like, "You gotta be kiddin' me," the irony was not lost on the robber. "All right. Where was Shudo?" NG called for him, the roar clearly comprehensible even above the din of shouts, structural collapses and blazing buildings. No sign of his intern. This was a terrible place to be separated, not that Shudo couldn't handle himself, but NG whirled around swinging a punch as someone grabbed his sleeve, but his fist went straight through the figure's head. Familiar, dead, green eyes looked up from a face coated in blood. "I found Shudo," Specter said, voice strained with what, fear? "Come with me quickly, please." Before NG could bark out the expected, "Why should I?" Specter continued, "Quickly, please." "Stain." The child took off running without waiting to see if the number 2 hero followed, which he did. Finally taking down the hero killer would be a huge achievement if the little beast were telling the truth. NG spat that thought out halfway through as it turned to ash. It was Stain, and he had 2 victims lying in bloody heaps in a nondescript alley away from the focus of the chaos. One was the pro-hero Native, the other Shudo. Native might be dead already, it was hard to say, but NG found that felt rather unimportant at the moment. Stain stood with one foot on Shudo's back, a sword in one hand, ready to finish his work with a coup de grace. The only thing that had stopped him, delayed him a few precious seconds, was Specter clawing and biting at his arm. "We both know you've not the strength left to stop me, kid," Stain told the child deadpan before firmly gripping an, apparently, solid wrist and tossing the vigilante aside like a sack of potatoes. The hero killer raised his blade, and Endeavor Slide tackled him, his vision glowing red, and not just from the light of his flames. "Don't let him drink your blood." Specter hollered from the patch of trash bags in which Stain's throw had buried him. NG barely heard him. Stain was good, frighteningly good, but no one on Earth was good enough to compensate for blades warping and melting as they drew near enough to land a hit. Whatever plan the hero killer had that involved drinking blood was thwarted by the skyrocketing ambient air temperature. NG had no time for this. No time for games. So what if he killed this BSTRD? How dare he? NG grappled Stain into an arm lock, then a headlock, then slammed the villain face first into the ground and stomped on him for good measure before cuffing Stain's hands and feet. Always carry at least 2 pairs of HNDCFFS. That took 2 dim and long Shudo. Specter had flipped NG's unconscious child onto his back, revealing the dreadful slash across Shudo's chest and stomach from which dark blood welled up like water from a hot spring. Apparently at a loss for better material to stem the bleeding, the ghost had dragged a cushion off an abandoned chair and was attempting to manhandle it into place. The cushion, however, kept phasing through the vigilante's hands as Specter whimpered in mortified frustration. Too exhausted to maintain any semblance of a corporeal form? NG barked an order for an ambulance over his earpiece, then lunged to his son's side, taking the cushion from the trembling ghost and applying pressure. NG stared at Specter's eyes, cold as foggy hell, at his blood-stained chest, skin corpse pale, at his twisted hand, And then imagined Shudo's mismatched eyes fogged over like that, imagined his son wearing that bleach-boned skin, sporting those blue lips and nail beds. NG shuddered, screaming in fury to hide his weakness from the world. What happened here? Specter swayed on his feet, nearly too tired to stand back up. He heard the screams. And came to help, Specter rasped. I saw but I couldn't help. Even if I weren't exhausted, Stain isn't someone I can beat, so I found you. Demon crazy vigilante. It would do no good to hit the ghost, no matter how angry NG was, and, although the pro steadfastly refused to acknowledge it right now, he owed this menace. No hitting Specter. NG could get up and kick Stain again instead, but Shudo was more important, and it wasn't the hero-killer Endeavor raged it now, was it? He'd already beaten the BSTRD to a pulp for what he did. Might as well ask something logical. Is Native still alive? Specter nodded listlessly. Just knocked out. Seems stable. The flashing lights of an ambulance tore aside the darkness of the alley. Specter murmured, I've gotta leave. Please be all right, and vanished. NG definitely owed the ghost a thank you, but he doubted he would ever be calm enough to deliver it in person. Dozens of distracting emotions tangled up his chest in a knot that would have to be cut free. Attempting to untie it would be futile. The paramedics rushed Endeavor, and he forced himself to relinquish Shudo to them. It wasn't his weapon that he handed over to them, it was his child, and he must be thick-skulled if it took seeing Shudo bleeding to death while the soul-chilling image of a dead boy looked on to remind him what it meant to care about someone. There was blood on NG's hands and fire in his veins, and not from his quirk. Hellfire he called his quirk, but he was only now learning what real hellfire felt like. His child's blood dripped off his hands, and the ambulance slammed its doors, siren blaring as it took off into the night with 2 unconscious passengers. What if he never saw Shudo alive again? When was the last time he said anything nice to his child? Did anything nice? Anything that wasn't cruel? He envied Specter then for the ghost's ability to vanish into thin air. The burning in NG's skin rooted him to the ground, kept at bay any thought of returning to the chaos of Hosu, a city that needed all the help it could get. Maybe he could just die instead, make a bargain with the universe. Let Shudo walk away, let Stain stab NG in his child's stead. At least then he wouldn't feel like this. It's not worth it, whispered Specter, fading in and out of reality to his left. The ghost looked like a broken television screen, marred by static and dark patches. What? NG snapped. Dying like that, the boy said, slowly shaking his head. Had NG expressed that death wish aloud? It doesn't solve anything. The child vanished, this time for good, leaving Endeavor to pick his way through the physical and mental shards of Hosu City. There were Nomu to kill and fires to attend, but Shudo's father still found himself collapsed in a chair in the hospital's soft white waiting room long before the surgeons had any news. The flash of a blade silver even in the dim light. A crooked smile. One step back now. Red-hot pain across his face. No. Across his chest a screech of agony that might be his, someone being torn to bits and devoured. It's him. 1,000 teeth rip his stomach open. His vision blurs red. The street meets his face. Cold. Colder than he's ever been, like there's never been heat in the world. Darkness leaching through every crack in his shadowy awareness chains binding his wrists and ankles, too heavy to carry above the surface. Shudo dragged his eyes open. A rhythmic beep sounded in his ears. It was already driving him crazy. Everything ached. Even raising an eyelid was a nearly insurmountable task, and he had more sharp, pointy things in him than a pincushion. An oxygen mask covered his mouth and nose. His throat ached especially fiercely. He had probably been on a ventilator for a while. Shudo's father was passed out in a heap in a hospital chair which was much too small to accommodate Endeavor's huge frame. It was comical on some level. Shudo snorted and coughed, a spike of white-hot steel piercing through his chest and stomach. Endeavor's eyes snapped open. Shudo! He tried to open his mouth. Don't speak. You're lucky to be alive. Lucky to be alive? Just how badly had he been hurt? The end of the fight with Stain was murky. I tracked down an old classmate with a healing quirk, Shudo's father continued, which was rather out of character, but any distraction was welcome. and paid him an obscene amount of money to come down from the Swiss Alps and fly here to help you. I may have also begged him and threatened his pets. That sort of sounded like his father? Threatening pets did. Begging did not. You need to rest still. Go back to sleep. Well, he didn't feel like arguing today. We'll talk more tomorrow. A number of your classmates have asked after you. Some will want to see you in the next few days if you can handle that. Endeavor said a few more things, but they all slipped from Shudo's mind before he could analyze them. Why was his father being a decent person? When Shudo next drifted awake, his eyelids were not so heavy and his father was still there in the little chair, this time doing paperwork. What were you thinking? His father said. That was more like it. You could have died. You would have died if it weren't for the crazy ghost. Specter, if I had been not 30 even 10 seconds later you and Native would both be dead and Stain would have been long gone. You're no good to anyone dead, Shudo. Endeavor abruptly got to his feet and stalked out into the hall leaving Shudo in miserable silence. Even when he lay in agony in a crisp hospital bed, his father still ripped his teeth into him. Couldn't he have a break? Don't listen to any of that crap, Shudo. What? The dual quirk wielder tilted his head with aching effort and found Specter perched on his windowsill. He's just saying that and making a run for it because he didn't want you to see that he was crying. What? What? Shudo choked out, sounding like a strangled pangolin. Specter nodded. And maybe Shudo ought to feel more nervous about the vigilante being in his room. He was worried to pieces and absolutely miserable. Specter looked like he was still worried to pieces and absolutely miserable. He thought you were going to die. Everyone thought you were going to die. Specter was crying now too. Why did this kid even care? They'd only met once before. It hardly seemed worth camping out in his hospital room. Why were you here? Specter looked shocked. I was there. And I couldn't help, and you're my friend, even if I'm not your friend, and it doesn't do anyone any good that I'm here, but whenever I leave all I can think about is, what if he's dead when I come back? Shudo blinked. His father was crying and a vague acquaintance too. Over him. How was he supposed to handle this? Not gonna die. And it was overwhelming to think he nearly had, that a few seconds was all that separated him from never having this conversation, from never having any conversation ever again. How could he even process that? It all seemed surreal still. Maybe he actually had died and nothing here was actually happening at all. How would he know? Good. Specter interrupted Shudo's spiraling thoughts, then started as a knock resounded through the small room. I'll give you privacy. The ghost stepped through the wall. Natsuo and Fuyumi lunged at Shudo shouting incoherent things. He tried to reassure them amidst the reprimands, the pleas, the sobs. He promised not to do that ever again, to be more dim and careful, to think of himself and them and take it easy. Classmates started visiting the next day. Shudo was never very friendly in class. He didn't really know how to be friendly, but had a steady stream of visitors nonetheless. The most memorable was Ida, who begged his forgiveness for something. Shudo didn't really understand what was going on with his engine-quirked classmate. Endeavor came back to see him after 2 days, although Shudo had seen his father lingering vigilantly in the hallway several times when classmates entered and exited. Endeavor again took a seat in a comically small plastic chair. Father and son stared at each other. Shudo, do you want to be a hero? Shudo coughed. What? Was his father doubting him after his injury? Had he given up on him? Decided he was broken now? Seen him starting awake from nightmares filled to the brim with maze-like alleyways and glittering swords and decided he wasn't worth the effort? What do you want to do with your life, Shudo? Ugh, that had never been a factor in his decision-making before, not really. Why? You might say I had some small revelation when the surgeon told me you would almost certainly be dead the next time I saw you. Shudo shuddered despite himself at the thought of surgeons pawing through his chest and stomach trying to piece flesh together. His father paused, waiting for Shudo to regather. Some composure. Numbers don't fix stab wounds. I could be number 1, you could be number 1, All Might could be number 1, and you would still be dying. I stood there trying to think of the last time I said something nice to you, and I couldn't recall. I realized that I don't really know who you are, or who I am for that matter. There was a surreal silence. So, do you want this life, Shudo? Do you want to be a hero? Still too proud to apologize, but his father had never spoken like this to him before. I'll think about what I want. Please do. And whatever you decide Endeavor turned away to hide his twisted expression. I would like to know. I would like to know who you are. Todoroki looked no worse for the wear, aloof and professional as always, but Tsuyu knew a poker face when she saw one. No one goes through something like that and stays the same. The teenage glacier summoner was only alive now because his father had somehow managed to lure a reclusive, literal necromancer halfway across the world. There were injuries conventional healing quirks could not help with repairing damaged organs, regenerating appendages, and the specialists who could do such things were few, far between, prone to failure, and plagued by catches in their quirks' functions. As such, it was impossible for normal people to get a hold of professionals with such skills. Even high-ranking heroes often couldn't get a hold of them. Rumor had it Endeavor had offered an old friend more than 2 million euros to come to Japan and try to save his child. Ida couldn't meet Todoroki's eyes. Most people didn't notice, but Tsuyu wasn't most people. She heard the high pitch in Ida's voice whenever he spoke to his dual-quirked classmate. She saw the guilt in Ida's twisted expressions but couldn't understand it. Ida's emotions about Stain were bound to be complicated after what happened to his brother, but why would he feel guilty? Some walked on eggshells around Todoroki, afraid to reopen some barely sealed wound. Others tried, valiantly, to act like nothing had happened, Kirishima and Tsuyu among them. She didn't want to constantly remind him of his recent trauma by acting strange. Bakugo yelled at Todoroki once and then stopped talking to him at all, acting like the ice wielder didn't exist, but treating him like glass during sparring in an incredible contrast to his conduct during the sports festival. The class tried to get back to normal, but normal proved subjective and elusive, especially given what happened during hand-to-hand sparring 2 days later. The class watched each match, paying close attention as Aizawa gave feedback. It was hard to tell, as Todoroki and Shiro danced around each other on the well-trod grass, whether the dual quirk student was in pain or simply being careful, but either way Shiro managed a few good hits, Todoroki leaping back each time, until the two tumbled to the grass, wrestling. Torn clothing was commonplace in heroics class, but it was unusual for someone to have his shirt shredded entirely. However, when Shiro taped Todoroki's side to the ground by accident as this was supposed to be quirkless combat training and the ice wielder rolled to his feet, the fabric of his gym uniform tore with a growl. Tsuyu didn't mean to stare at the scar, but it was impossible to turn away. Ropey white lines snaked insidiously from Todoroki's collarbone across his chest and down his stomach. It was a thick, irregular scar as if the skin had been shattered rather than sliced. Tsuyu shuddered and ripped her gaze away by force. Silence. Todoroki, Aizawa broke the glass atmosphere. You may go get a new shirt. Todoroki strode stiffly away, hiding the token of his mauling like it was something to be ashamed of. Class resumed awkwardly. Kirishima, Yaoyorozu, Ida, and Bakugo were completely off their games, with Ida and Bakugo appearing to approach nervous breakdowns. Aizawa definitely noticed, and he noticed Tsuyu noticing him notice. Tsuyu found Todoroki after class. He lingered in a shadowy corner in a manner reminiscent of something Tokoyami might do on a particularly emo day. Mismatched eyes met Tsuyu's unblinking gaze. Did you need something? Her classmate asked. I was at sea during internships. Yes? So I haven't had the opportunity to speak to you after Hosu. I wanted to tell you that I am very sorry for what happened to you and I am very glad you're all right. Tsuyu couldn't even imagine what it would be like for her class, and for the country, if Todoroki had died in Hosu. Endeavor had been acting very strange since his son's injury, quiet, and it seemed to have rubbed off on some other famous pros too. Tsuyu had seen some very odd interviews in the last few weeks. Why? What? Ribbit? Why does everyone care? Todoroki? What was that supposed to mean? The glacier caller shook his hair out in a candy cane halo, raking nails at his face. I hide in the back of class, say a word here and there, can't remember the last pleasant, polite conversation I had with a classmate, or anyone really, and suddenly everyone's so worried about me they're falling all over each other. Why does anyone even care? So, he was a little cold. Some people are just like that. Did Todoroki just think himself part of the furniture somehow? Having a restrained personality didn't make someone a robot. A robot would never accuse Dark Shadow of being an eldritch horror, claim the 2087 Federal Reserve heist was an inside job, or suggest Edgeshot was part of the Illuminati. A robot would not ask Tsuyu whether she hatched from an egg, no. She'd been asked before, but usually by prejudiced Jarkus, never by someone who was just curious and neutrally polite. Tsuyu reached very slowly, placed a hand on one of Todoroki's shoulders, one on his back, and pulled him into a hug. Please don't talk about yourself like that, Karo. You're a person, not a thing. You're our classmate, part of our lives, and we care about you. Tsuyu slowly released her stunned classmate, whose face revealed a storm of emotional turmoil. I'm glad you came back too. Some people would have dropped out of the hero course after experiencing something that terrible. You're very brave to return, Karo. Todoroki whispered, I do want to be a hero. Ribbit. My father asked me if I wanted to be a hero when I was recovering. No one ever asked before, but I realized I do. I do want to be a hero. A light of fiery determination broke through the storm of chaos in Todoroki's gaze. I do want to be the best I can be, but more than that I want to see a world without people like Stain in it. He spat the hero killer's name with disdain, but his face grimaced into something akin to shame. I want to be someone people can look up to, someone worth caring about, someone who cares about others in return. Tsuyu's classmate shook his head and rubbed his eyes. It's just, there are so many things flying around in my head and everyone stares and whispers and I. Tsuyu hugged him again. You can't expect things to go back to normal, Karo. This is really hard on you. It's hard on us too. In a few weeks, things will settle down. Hopefully. Give yourself some time. Give us some time too. Todoroki hesitantly returned Tsuyu's embrace. It was like he'd never given a hug before. I think I can do that, he muttered. Good. Take care of yourself, Karo, and remember, she wasn't completely sure if she had seen that flash of shame or not, but if she had she ought to crush it with a sledgehammer and if not, it did no harm to say this. You didn't do anything wrong. You are not somehow bad or weak because you were hurt. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Take care of yourself, Karo. Todoroki stiffened as her words registered but then relaxed. Apparently, she had seen that flash of shame after all. Tsuyu imagined she would have to remind her friend several times that there was no reason for it. Why do the victims of the most heinous crimes always feel guilty and the perpetrators proud? Power, perhaps. The perpetrators take pride in their ability to do to others as they please. The victims are ashamed that they could not defend themselves. It is a flaw in the human psyche, one that Tsuyu would stomp flat into the ground like a pancake or something thinner than a pancake. A crepe maybe. The two classmates walked to the gates together, silently at first, but gradually they began to talk again. They chatted about useless things. Class, news, weather, rumors. Apparently the 1B copycat, Monoma, had been spending extra time training with Kiyama and other students were only somewhat in jest commenting on his potential as a future 18+ hero. It seems a bit early for him to make such a decision, Todoroki pointed out. When did Midnight get her a rating, Karo? Did she debut that way? I have no idea. It was nice. Tsuyu was somewhat disappointed when they parted ways. Abandoned. Churches were mystical places. There was always something mysterious in the air, a quiet kind of almost insidious energy. Candles fluttered in the breeze drifting through a tall, broken window of once impressive stained glass. Shadows danced in the bloody firelight. There was no atmosphere quite like this, no substitute. Fumikage could spend hours here thinking, reading, writing. For whatever reason, this mostly abandoned building was reasonably clean and, apparently, rarely visited by anyone else. Fumikage was very lucky to have found it. Dark Shadow twisted and leaned to read over Fumicage's shoulder, gently running claws through his partner's feather crest. The preening was appreciated. Are you done with this page? His shadow asked and Fumikage flipped to the next section. The Fall of the House of Usher was an intriguing read, perfect for the current atmosphere. A door squealed open and crashed closed. Fumikage looked up, his partner tensing on his shoulder. "Oh, sorry. I'll be going," said the visitor's voice from the dark. "You have every right to be here," Fumikage protested. The speaker sounded young, likely near his own age. This was public space. Fumikage need not be unfriendly, although he ought to be wary. Quiet steps approached. A blood-soaked figure stepped past the pews and towards the old altar of ebony and stainless steel inlay. Dark Shadow hissed softly. Fumikage shushed his partner. The gore-spattered apparition stared at the altar and at the broken stained glass beyond as if all the universe's mysteries were hidden there. "Are you injured?" Fumikage asked at last. "No," the apparition replied. Dark Shadow stretched out slowly, approaching the figure curiously. The stranger and the familiar stared at each other. "I like him," Dark Shadow said abruptly. "He fits the atmosphere." The apparition blinked. Excuse me? "We're reading Edgar Allan Poe and ghost stories," Fumikage said, trying to hide his embarrassment. This was, perhaps, a really strange thing to be doing in an abandoned cathedral in the middle of the night, and it was awkward to admit to someone who looked so much like a ghost. Sorry about our lack of tact. Because it was never just his familiar's lack of tact but his own as well. Surprisingly, the stranger's forlorn expression quirked into a half-smile. "It's all right. I like you too." The teenager seemed to think for a moment about what to call Dark Shadow. "Pretty bird. You also fit the atmosphere." Pretty bird? Well, Fumikage supposed that was an apt description. His familiar was very pretty, ferocious too. "I do fit," agreed the familiar. "I'm even spookier than you." Fumikage was accustomed to conversations going off the rails in interesting ways when he and Dark Shadow became involved, but this was a new level of strange. For once, neither he nor his familiar was the soul, "'Cause you are both very spooky." "Thanks. I think," the stranger murmured. "What brings you here?" Dark Shadow continued. The apparition shrugged. "I needed somewhere to think about things." "We'll leave you to it, then." Fumikage shouldn't let Dark Shadow bother the stranger, however the current conversation refused to die. "About?" asked the familiar. "Death," the apparition provided. "And life, I suppose, and things in between." Dark Shadow puffed up at the mention of things in between. "Like me," he declared, obviously delighted. "You don't think you're alive?" The apparition, in stark contrast, spoke in a painfully sad whimper. "Nope. No breath, no heart." The familiar tapped his chest with a claw for emphasis. "I share with him," Dark Shadow indicated Fumikage, "and I wouldn't want anything else. He's mine. And I'm his. And we like it that way. Who needs a life?" "I miss mine," said the stranger, the tone chilling Fumikage more than any of Poe's lilting, macabre words. The familiar pet his head. "Oh, what happened to it?" "Dark Shadow." Fumikage hissed because that was enough and this conversation should really end now. "I threw it away." The apparition bowed his head. Fumikage froze in place at the implication. Was any of this real? Maybe he'd fallen asleep on his book. It could all be a dream. He didn't. Well, he did believe in ghosts, but didn't really expect to ever see one. Could he believe in this bloodied echo of a teenager who took his own life? "But if you liked it?" Dark Shadow pet his head. "I didn't though. I was miserable all the time and thought, but it didn't make anything better." "Are you a ghost?" Fumikage heard himself ask. "I am." "That's perfect." Dark Shadow decided. "Come here. Come read ghost stories with us. It will be so much better with the real thing standing right here." The ghost and Fumikage blinked at each other, then the apparition shrugged. "I don't have anywhere better to be?" Somehow Fumikage couldn't stomach chasing the ghost away now. Why should he? Why not give some comfort when he could? He did not believe the apparition to be dangerous. And Dark Shadow was right, in a sense, that reading ghost stories with a ghost was a timeless opportunity. Have you ever read The Raven? The whole experience was surreal. A sentient shadow, a ghost, and a bird-headed teenager reading gothic horror by flickering candlelight in an abandoned cathedral. If it weren't for Dark Shadow's assurances that he, too, remembered, Fumikage might well have written the events off as nothing more than fantasy. When Todoroki returned to class, he awkwardly shuffled around his classmates and collapsed gracelessly into his desk. The young man was swarmed instantly by well-wishing, occasional admonishments, namely Bakugo yelling, "Don't you dare ever lose that bat again, half and half. You hear me," and apologies, namely Ida, who, it seemed, blamed himself because he should have been there. He should have been the one maimed or killed. Shoulda would have to talk with him again, and probably his brother too. Many students walked on eggshells around their recovering classmate. Bakugo usually pretended Todoroki didn't exit. A new routine was established, bit by bit. The echoes would be slow to fade, however, and Shoyuta would have to keep a close eye on his students. He kept a close eye on his vigilante, too. The ghost was very sneaky easy when one was transparent and incorporeal on demand, but he was also nice, very nice. Shoyuta was nearly certain that Specter had never followed him home after a patrol, though he used to take roundabout routes to try to lose his hypothetical, invisible pursuer, and thus Specter assumed that Shoyuta would extend the vigilante the same courtesy. As such, Specter had not bothered to disappear again after punching a would-be jewel thief in the nose while Shoyuta was otherwise engaged. From rooftop to rooftop Eraserhead crept, careful not to let so much as the squeak of a boot reach his quarry's ears. Down another set of crooked streets, another left. Specter was distracted, visible but not tangible, wandering through solid objects, cars, trees, crying. Yes, Specter always wore his emotions on his bloody sleeves, but this seemed different. Shoyuta wasn't concerned. He really wasn't. A rain cloud gravitated over Specter's head and began to pour icy water, the cloud extending in a 10-meter radius. So, Specter exerted significant local control over the weather, but not always consciously. Where was the kid even headed? A graveyard. Old vines wrapped around an arching entrance of steel and stone which clearly conveyed, "Abandon all hope," to those who entered. Well, a rainstorm was fitting for a graveside visit. Shoyuta stayed well clear, hidden by the shadow of a towering conifer, as Specter knelt before a lonely grave, running his now solid fingers over the name and allowing the rain to touch his hair so that the strands plastered onto his face. The green locks turned dark, near black, under the onslaught. Specter waited. Shoyuta waited. An hour passed. 2 hours. Just go already. Leave and let Shoyuta see whose grave you knelt before, then let Shoyuta go home and sleep. Specter got to his feet and trudged away, still crying. 20 minutes was enough time to be sure the kid was gone. What was the point in collecting information on someone if the other party knew you knew? Shoyuta made his way to the headstone. May you find peace from your darkness. Midoriya Izuku. Now who were you to Specter? It was child's play to find out. An internet search for the late child turned up an article series in a regional paper about quirk discrimination, bullying, and neglect in public schools. Despite complaints and numerous, obvious infractions, no action was taken by school administration or staff until the tragic suicide of quirkless senior Midoriya Izuku, who jumped from the roof. Shoyuta grimaced. Sad deaths were a part of life for heroes, especially underground operators. Pointless deaths were common enough too, but the suicide of a child never ceased to be a soul-crushing moment, as if the gates of heaven had been thrown asunder and the only revelation to follow was, there is nothing here at all, there is no heaven and hell is on earth. It was physically painful to read the article. No students were named as bullies, but Shoyuta found Bakugo peeking out from one photograph of a bustling hallway, a snarl on the student's face and explosions on his palms. What were the odds that Shoyuta would find that problem child here? And Specter should be here too. No one sobs before the grave of a stranger. Friend? Family? The article was no help. Midoriya's fate was only a few paragraphs to sum up a whole life. Sometimes Shoyuta hated his job. The pro logged into the police database and pulled up the report on the suicide of Midoriya Izuku. Green hair, green eyes, 5'10". It couldn't be. That didn't make any DMN sense. He scrolled to the identification section, a school photo on display, and Specter smiled at Shoyuta from the screen, eyes bright like emeralds, but that grin seemed fake. Obviously fake. It just couldn't be. Autopsy report definitely Midoriya Izuku, definitely dead, definitely suicide. Security cameras at the school caught the jump, this was impossible. Or was it? I'm a ghost. Specter said that was his quirk. Did he mean it literally? It hadn't even seemed a possibility, laughable at best. Not even Nedzu had suggested such a thing when they discussed the Vigilante, but it was definitely Specter in those photos. Shoyuta slammed his forehead into his desk, cringing against the grainy wood. Of all the DMN heroes in the whole DMN world, he has to choose me to follow around? Because what was Shoyuta even supposed to do? To say? What consolation can you give to a kid who took his own life because his classmates tortured him day in and out? What can you offer? Hell, Shoyuta liked Specter. He admitted it, pure heart, stands by his friends, works carefully and quietly, but he did not want to deal with this unholy mess. Shoyuta went through the motions of his lesson plan. Yaoyorozu, Azui, and Shinso definitely noticed he wasn't all with them, but it seemed the other students were fooled. No, Kirishima had caught on too. Well, Bakugo and Midoriya went to the same school. Maybe Bakugo knew him? Shoyuta could ask, but under what pretense? That death investigation was long closed. He could say they were reopening it, which in effect they were, because the kid clearly didn't stay dead. What an unspeakable legal mess it would be to get Midoriya back into the normal population, after Shoyuta caught up with him and tamed him, and convinced him to turn his new life around. Hell, the kid was legally dead. Did that mean he'd never have to pay taxes? Not such a bad deal, perhaps no. No jokes about this. Too sad for jokes. Bakugo, Shoyuta called, gesturing for his student to remain as the others filed out. The bleach blonde grimaced and stayed. I presume. The answer is no, but it would be useful for a reopened investigation if you happen to have known Midoriya Izuku. Bakugo stiffened, his face flying through 1,000 different emotions: pain, anger, misery, guilt, fear, despair, before settling on hopeless. Yeah, Bakugo definitely knew the kid. The blonde seemed to consider lying, then sighed at the futility. Bakugo knew he hadn't schooled his expression enough for a lie to be believable. Yeah. I knew him, but I wish I hadn't. What was that supposed to mean? Why? 'Cause I'm a BC and he had enough problems without me. Language. Mind telling me a bit about Midoriya? Where was this conversation going? Nowhere good, clearly, but anything would be helpful. They would come back to the BSTRD comment later. Bakugo visibly winced. We were neighbors, inseparable, before they found out he was quirkless, or rather had an invisible quirk. The kid was as far from quirkless as All Might. He always wanted to be a hero. Never gave up hope until, well, I guess he did give up in the end. He was shy, stuttered a lot. Really brave, stupidly so, at least when we were young, though I think we all beat that out of him. So Bakugo had been a tormentor rather than an ally. Not really surprising, disappointing though, and that explained the guilty look that had flashed across the student's face and the BSRD comment. Didn't beat the smarts out of him. The nerd was clever, really clever, liked to watch heroes and villains fight and take notes on them, abilities, strategies, the works. Have his last notebook, actually. You dropped it and never came back for it. Bakugo grimaced. I should really give it to his mom, but he saw things I didn't even imagine could be there, made leaps where I couldn't even find the starting line, and you know I'm no slouch. Brilliant nerd. With a hunch of his shoulders, the student spat, dead, brilliant nerd. The analysis skills definitely fit, then. Always wanted to be a hero? That fit to. Being dead did restrict one's access to higher education, and vigilantism was an attractive alternative when hero programs were out of reach. Did Midoriya have family? Bakugo nodded. Dad was a deadbeat, took off when we were around 5. Mother is Midoriya Inko. Lives across the street from me still. No siblings, no cousins, uncles, or aunts that I know of. Why wouldn't Specter return to his mother? That was a hard thing to comprehend. Or did he live with her now? Did she know her son wasn't really dead, that he was the new vigilante in town? But Specter had made it clear he was homeless, and Shoyuta was sure he hadn't lied. So why not go home? Did Midoriya Inko not know about her son, or did she not want him around? Or did he not want to live with her for some reason? Bakugo waited as Shoyuta mulled over his seemingly endless stack of problems and riddles. If you're gonna expel me, just do it already. Raising an eyebrow, Shoyuta asked, and why should I expel you? Though he could guess. 'Cause it was my fault. It wouldn't do to have Bakugo think that. Being a bully was not the same as being a murderer. Oh, did you push Midoriya off the roof? No. Tell him to jump? Yes. Should it expected a no there? The two stared at each other for a tense 20 seconds. Shoyuta, of course, never lost a staring contest. Bakugo blinked and turned away. All these problem children. Oh hell, what was he supposed to do about this one? A lot of Bakugo's behavior made much more sense upon finally discovering this bloody puzzle piece. No. I'm not going to expel you. I tell you to go home and think about what you've done, but it's pretty clear you've been thinking too much already. Thank you for your help, Bakugo. The blonde left, shoulders hunched and head bowed. A dead kid vigilante and the one who blamed himself for that death. What vengeful god had Shoyuta wronged? What am I going to do with either of you? Who was this scruffy man? He looked like he hadn't slept in a week or showered in days. And that scarf was bizarre. Inko cautiously opened her door. Midoriya Inko? This is she. The man pulled a pro-hero license from some pocket. Aizawa Shoyuta, Eraserhead. What could he want with her? May I speak with you briefly, ma'am? Of course. Come in. What else could she say? No. Please leave. I am tired and miserable and lonely and wish to remain so. Probably wouldn't go over well. The hero she had never heard of stepped deftly into her home, bloodshot eyes scanning everything. She should offer tea, even if she just wanted this to be over. Would you like some tea? Not today. Thank you, but I should not trouble you long. What is this about, Eraserhead? I am part of a confidential investigation into a vigilante called Specter. What did that have to do with her? We have reason to believe that your son knew him. Inko froze, like she did any time someone mentioned Izuku, unable to grasp even at the strings of a reply. How? The hero sighed. It's complicated and unpleasant. You certainly have more than your share of unpleasant already, so I'll spare you the details. Inko shuddered. Now I'll just imagine them, that will be worse. The hero shook his head. Details involving Specter are unpleasant, not details involving Midoriya Izuku. I apologize for giving you that impression, and I apologize for what you have been through. Not sorry for your loss. Strange. It was nice to hear something other than that tired cliché. What did you need from me then? If you could tell me about your son, please. Blink. To what? Apparently, she was easy to read. Just about what kind of person he was. Where he went. What he liked to do. If it is too unpleasant, of course, dash. No. Inko missed Izuku. Constantly. Loved him. Wanted to talk about him. I knew he was unhappy. No, don't start there. He always wanted to be a hero. He was quirkless, but never stopped dreaming. He used to watch fights and take notes. She still had those notebooks, of course. But here was one on the side table. She handed it over. The hero narrowed his eyes, flipping through the pages before handing it back. He really admired All Might, but what child doesn't? There was so much more to say, but how could she distill down 14 years into a few sentences? All she had of him were words now. He was a sweetheart. He would never leave someone in pain. He would always try to help, no matter who it was. He'd die before he left someone to suffer. And he had died. And left her to suffer. All the pain could be boxed, tied shut with a ribbon and a fake smile, but of all the things she hid and hid from, she could not hide the shame. What sort of parent was she? You could fail your child 1,000 ways, but to fail so miserably as to see your baby's funeral? Worthless. She was worthless. How could she have never understood? Why didn't she notice? Why didn't she do something? She was crying now too. What a mess. I'm sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for. There seemed to be a lot of meaning wrapped up in that sentence. Something else was going on here. I do apologize for upsetting you. Can you tell me about any of his friends? Enemies, if he had any? There was a hole too deep to crawl out of. Inko's breath hitched. He always acted like he was still friends with Bakugo Katsuki, but I could at least see that for a lie. I don't think, and Lord it was hard to choke out, that he really had anyone but me. But there were all those others at the funeral, people whose lives he brightened if ever so slightly. Some of the staff at his school, some workers at nearby shops, knew him, but I knew he was ostracized by his classmates. But there wasn't much she could do, especially when he wouldn't talk about it, protecting her, always putting others first. He hid his pain from her to spare her and let it eat him alive rather than ask for help. Why couldn't he be selfish just once? Just selfish enough to be selfless? Why couldn't he see how she suffered from his secrets? Why couldn't he think of her, the 1,000 tears she shed for every drop of his blood? But that was nonsense. She had no right to feel this way, no right to be angry with him any more than if he were killed in a car accident. It was not his shame, not his fault. Repeat it. Stop blaming yourself. Stop blaming him. Have respect. For the living. For the dead. The pro-hero side. There are countless empty platitudes I could offer you, but they don't seem worth the time it takes to say them. That was new. He was right though, and she'd heard them all before. Everyone spat those hollow phrases, feeling they had to say something, but words couldn't serve these morbid purposes. Silence conveyed the meaning better. Thank you for speaking with me. A few last niceties were exchanged, and the hero departed. Silence. It stretched through the house, through a sealed, dusty room where a child once lived, through her bones, through her mind. No more words. Demon, he recognized the boy now as Aizawa handed over Specter's thick folder. Things hadn't clicked when Toshinori saw the Vigilante at the USJ, but the boy's middle school photo was easily recognizable. Midoriya Izuku. Toshinori must have met him days, maybe hours, before he killed himself. You know him? Aizawa narrowed his eyes. No one should be able to glare like that. Toshinori might deserve it this time. No. I met him once. How could he explain this? Yet another child he couldn't save, didn't realize needed saving. I saved him from a villain. The kid fought like a devil. Not that it made a difference, the slime would have certainly killed him, but it wasn't what? Fluorescent lights buzzed and a clock ticked. He was taking too much time to answer. He asked me if he could be a hero even if he were quirkless. Go for honesty. It's worse to cover it up, and Aizawa is never fooled. I told him no. Aizawa narrowed his bloodshot eyes even further. I also told him he was brave and would make a fine detective or EMT. I didn't want to lie, Aizawa. Maybe some quirkless people have what it takes, but he was small, light, not a trained fighter. I didn't want to send him on a hopeless quest that would get him killed. Heroes led very dangerous lives even with powerful quirks, but this poor boy would have been infinitely better off if Toshinori had spouted some inspirational nonsense about how anyone can be a hero. Aizawa snarled. Toshinori sighed. He didn't know what he should have said. All Might was supposed to be fearless, perfect almost, to always know what to say, what to do, but I am here doesn't always cut it. What should I have said, Aizawa? The underground hero started, narrowed his eyes further still, right down to pinpoint slits, but it was clear Aizawa didn't know either. He needed someone to tell him heroes aren't all there is to life. We aren't. Aizawa curled his fingers around a pencil and squeezed until it snapped. Someone to tell him he wasn't worthless. Toshinori bowed his head, a few moments of silence then, for a lost child, and for the society that lost him. It might feel like this death was all Toshinori's fault, but he knew it wasn't. He had just played the role of the 100th and final nail in the coffin. What makes humans treat each other so cruelly? Send each other to their undeserving, young graves? Decades fighting alongside heroes against villains and natural disasters, seeing the very worst and the very best humanity had to offer, and he still couldn't hope to understand why people did the things they did. It might be an irresponsible segue, but why not get all the unpleasant conversations out of the way right now? I suppose I could have told him I was born quirkless too. It was Aizawa's turn to cough in shock, although the younger man didn't go so far as to cough up blood. What? You're not quirkless, what are you dash? Not anymore. My quirk can be passed on from person to person. He'd thought about approaching students without Aizawa's permission, but dark and grouchy as the teacher might be, he had an unshakable devotion to his pupils and to his fellow heroes, and Toshinori would never think of bypassing him. Eraserhead had taken on dozens of villains alone at the USJ to defend his students. He was ready to die for his class, and Toshinori would not work behind his back. "Why are you telling me this? Why now?" Shrewd and frightening as always, Toshinori sometimes wondered how none of Aizawa's students had suffered heart attacks yet. "Because it's time for me to give it up. I can't really use it well anymore." It burned to say it, to accept that, whereas the essence of All for One was hoarding power as long as possible, the essence of One for All was letting power go. Who was he even without One for All? What could he do? Something at least. Keep his successor safe, the other children safe, his colleagues. You don't always need raw power to watch someone's back. Nedzu was a fine example. Toshinori would give it everything he had left. "And I want to give it to one of your students." Stare but not glare. Apparently asking permission had earned Toshinori a reprieve from the worst of Aizawa's silent disapproval. "Who?" "Azui Tsu." "Why? Wouldn't he already know?" Certainly Aizawa knew his students better than Toshinori. "She is straightforward, blunt, but kind. She takes initiative but is not reckless. She cares deeply about everyone and fights savagely and creatively when need be. She takes care of her colleagues and she also takes care of herself." Aizawa nodded slowly, the hint of a smile visible beneath his ever-present scarf. "Is this power you plan to give dangerous?" "Probably. It's a different experience for everyone. It can damage unprepared bodies, though I never had an issue with that." Aizawa nodded slowly. "I'll set up a meeting with Azui. If she agrees, we talk to her parents about it." The grimace on Toshinori's face must have been easy to read. "All will be sworn to secrecy, of course. I've met her parents. I think they will agree if she does." "You want me to what?" Tsuyu must not understand what was being discussed. Before her, All Might stood as a sunburned skeleton, coughing droplets of blood as if it were nothing new. Good Lord, she hadn't even fathomed he was ill and she was supposed to do something about it. Needed to, but what could she do? "I would like you to be the next holder of my quirk, One for All. There were 7 holders before me. I would like you to be the 9th. When a holder is ready to retire or can't use it properly, One for All is passed to the next generation." Ribbit. Tsuyu was proud of herself for managing even this pitiful reply. It was a lot to take in. "It's not something I would ask you to take lightly and it could put a target on your back, but I think you would be the best holder." "But what did she have that others didn't?" "But why?" "You're persevering." Aizawa cut in from where he had perched unobtrusively on a chair in the corner of the teacher's lounge. "You are emotionally intelligent, observant, honest, eager to learn, and good in a fight. More than that, you look out for others. I know at least 2 of your classmates would not be here if it weren't for you." Mineta and Shinso at these. He still shuddered at the thought, and it was fine to shudder. If she had reacted a few seconds later they would be dead. That was worth a shudder or two. "And I know that you've been helping Todoroki too." He'd noticed that? Of course he had. A breeze drifted through the window. "So you must be blushing like a tomato, mister." Aizawa never spoke to anyone like that. Had he ever given a compliment before? "The point is," All Might coughed again, "there are many excellent reasons to choose you. But wouldn't someone else be better? You can think about it if you like. I would ask you not to share any of these secrets just yet, though." It was a gorgeous day, sunlight catching on the leaves, glinting on steel fences and polished windows, lazy clouds rolling across a deep blue sky. How long would it last? All Might was a pillar of society. Lord New Endeavor could never take his place. People didn't like the flame hero, and having met him and his youngest child, Tsuyu understood the public's opinion. There were clouds on the horizon, ferocious storms, she was sure, and what good would she be against them? She wasn't the best in her class. During most of the USJ incident she hid, feeling both hopeless and helpless, but if right then she'd had the power All Might spoke of, or rather the opportunity to have that power, she would have taken it in a heartbeat. Anything for the edge, for the strength to chase the villains away from her friends and drive them back into their dark, misty holes. She felt the fire in her blood, the distant roar of righteous fury, the unending call to the battlefield, to save and to fight. You would teach me Kero? Of course, both teachers replied, glancing at each other with inscrutable expressions when they spoke simultaneously. I accept. Can I tell my parents? They would worry, of course, but they would agree. We'll be getting their permission, said Aizawa. In the meantime, there is extra strength training you will need to do to prepare yourself, and some friends of All Might will come by to lecture you on how to wield your power safely. Good, anything would be appreciated. All Might cleared his throat. I would like to hand one for all over slightly prior to final exams. I don't think I will be able to use it much longer after that. Tsuyu jolted, as did Aizawa. Perhaps he, also, hadn't realized how close they were to the end of an era, and I want to be able to train you at least a little while I still have one for all myself. So he'd keep it after passing it on. Tsuyu could deal with this, maybe. Tsuyu bowed her head. Thank you for this honor. I won't let you down, Kero. She wouldn't let anyone down. Tsuyu kicked a microwave as hard as she could, wincing at the impact. A crescent moon gazed down at her, casting a vague silver light over Dagoba Beach in all its destroyed glory. As part of her extra training, she had been assigned to clean this place, restore the golden sands to their former beauty. To some extent at least, they didn't expect her to finish before sometime next year, and she was getting one for all before the training camp regardless. Her teachers trusted her enough to leave her to work alone provided she kept her phone on and checked in at regular intervals. One of them would drive her home once she finished for the night. Tsuyu pulled on a heavy pair of leather gloves in anticipation of the rust on a shredded chair in front of her, hefting it above her head and awkwardly stumbling to the dumpster by a rotting pier. Her body wasn't really made to move that way. Tsuyu hopped back to the nearest scrap heap, looking for a suitable item to move, and nearly ran into a confused teenager. Eep! Squeaked the boy, leaping behind a mauled couch. Tsuyu held her hands up in a placating gesture. What was this boy doing here? Sorry, Kero. Didn't mean to startle you. Eyes peeked out above the rotting upholstery. It's fine, I was just dozing and I didn't think anyone else was gonna be here. What are you doing here? His voice was soft, strange, an edge of nervousness on some words, confidence on others. I'm cleaning the beach, Kero. Service to the community is important, as is training muscles to survive one for all. What are you doing here? Are you all right? Fine, the boy replied. I just nap here sometimes. Tsuyu sniffed and wrinkled her nose at the pungent scent of decay. I can think of more pleasant places for that. Many more pleasant places. But it's really quiet. Something was really wrong here. What's your name, Kero? The boy ducked further behind the couch, then sighed as if he were giving up on life and clambered over the furniture's back. It's Specter, the bloodied figure told her. No way. What were the odds? Well, what were the odds of Tsuyu being here? Inheriting one for all? Maybe it wasn't so far-fetched. Mr. Aizawa's pet vigilante? That may have been too blunt. It was definitely him. Tsuyu got a decent look at the vigilante during the USJ incident. Specter, to her surprise, snorted a laugh. I think I may be more of a stalker than a pet. Do you want any help? I'm sorry. With cleaning the beach. What? Maybe she could use some company tonight. Specter definitely could, poor thing. She had the nagging feeling he was sleeping here because he was homeless and friendless. She would be happy to ease that pain for one night, and she had no reason to believe Specter a danger to her. Feel free to stick around. It would be nice to have someone to talk to. Oh, sure. The ghost smiled, gesturing to a collapsed tent and pulling it from the sand with some kind of telekinesis. He lugged it towards the dumpsters. Tsuyu picked up a something or other and hopped after her new companion. For a few minutes, only the sound of smashing plastic and metal interrupted the night, but Tsuyu had questions. She couldn't help but voice them. Specter? How old are you, Kero? I would be about your age. Ribbit? What did that mean? It's complicated. Specter sighed. Sorry. It's not your fault. He said it like it was someone's fault. I'm sorry still. Specter quit telekinetically tossing things around and began dragging smaller items by hand. Are you all right? The ghost smiled that was gory. I get tired quickly, which is why I hang around with Eraserhead a lot. We're both ambush predators of sorts. Trying to push your limits tonight then? Tsuyu could feel her own limits right at her back as her muscles trembled from exertion. Yeah. Specter grinned again. Thanks for letting me follow you around, Azui. Wait, she never introduced herself. How do you know my name, Karo? Oh, sports festival? I sometimes stalk Eraserhead like I said. At school? Well, it's not like I can enroll officially. Why not? Specter squirmed. Complicated. Curiosity or no curiosity, she knew not to press that issue. Oh, the Vigilante fidgeted as the two, exhausted, prepared to call it a night. Would you not tell anyone I was here? Why? Tsuyu had planned to tell Aizawa that she had found one of Specter's hiding places. Presuming her seemingly psychic teacher didn't already know. The ghost rubbed his neck, don't want people looking for me here. It's quiet. I like it that way. And, well, I don't want anyone feeling bad for me because I spend a lot of time in a garbage dump. So you should still tell someone, but if I told someone, would I see you here again? The Vigilante shook his head. Worried as she was for Specter and much as she would like to relay information to help her teacher, it was probably worth keeping quiet in order to assure that the disturbed teenager would keep coming here. The location of one of his hideouts was potentially valuable information if someone needed to find Specter in an emergency. I won't say a word. She saw Specter a few more times. They rarely talked of anything serious, rather gossiped about hero news, teachers at UA, Monoma becoming an 18-plus hero, happenings in the underworld. The Vigilante was a rambler, a lonely rambler, and Tsuyu was happy to let him talk. At long last, there was a knock on the door. Specter. Come in. A hunched figure stepped through the door literally and slowly approached the desk. The bloody child was clearly terrified. A sigh sounded from the hallway. The knob turned and Aizawa entered the room in the conventional manner. It's a pleasure to meet you, Nedzu told the ghost. Please have some tea. And Specter did, deftly raising a delicate teacup to his lips, sniffing the strong concoction and then sipping from it. Interesting. You wanted to see me, Principal Nedzu? Specter hunched in his seat, trying to bury himself in the velvet trim. See, terrify you. Sometimes there was nothing one could do, though, to appear less threatening, especially to an intelligent person. He doesn't bite, Specter, Aizawa sighed, taking another chair. The quick glance Specter threw towards his teacher suggested he was considering getting back up to hide behind Eraserhead. I know he doesn't bite. Nedzu flicked his ears in amusement and twisted the conversation onto productive rails. I've heard you enjoy analysis. So do I. So, tell me what you thought of the hero killer stain. The ghost blinked and began slowly, hesitantly, to explain the analysis he had made during his brief encounter with the S-class villain. Neither Nedzu nor Aizawa had heard details of what occurred in the fight. Endeavor had merely reported the Vigilante's presence and aid. Specter explained how he determined Stain's quirk and how he worked out that it depended on blood type. He then detailed the most effective potential countermeasures: intense heat, rain, agility rather than heavy armor, electricity quirks. Kaminari could, for example, just keep a static charge across his body. If Stain ever touched him with metal, he'd be electrocuted. Stain's motives weren't hard to understand. He pretty much screamed them to anyone who would listen. Nedzu felt a grin fly onto his face. Beautiful, all of it. Some points were wrong, others were unsophisticated, but the littlest Vigilante held so much potential. Nedzu must have this one. If Specter had wanted to be a hero as much as Aizawa believed, it shouldn't be too difficult to entice the ghost into the halls of UA, but Specter's emotional state was a complete wild card. Nedzu could think of dozens of reasons why the boy had elected to let his death lie, never revealing his presence to family or friends, and some reasons were more likely than others, but Nedzu didn't know Specter well enough to take more than a vaguely educated guess. If Specter were merely ashamed of what he had done, Nedzu would be able to offer him discretion and eventually the ghost could be convinced to reclaim his life. If Specter were legitimately unwanted by his mother and had no friends, Nedzu was sure Aizawa could be easily manipulated into adopting the Vigilante, who likely wouldn't put up much of a fight. But if Specter merely thought he was unwanted, If the feelings that had driven him to his premature death remained, he might react very badly to any offer of companionship. As he thought this, Nezu offered up his own analysis on Stain and continued rattling off about other villains and heroes of days past. Specter stared at Nezu with wide eyes, occasionally looking around for. The principal pushed a notebook and pencil towards his guest, who began scribbling down a whirlwind of notes. Aizawa looked bored. He always did, but he looked more bored than usual. Enough then. So, Specter, how would you like to come back and talk to me again? I'm not really so scary now, am I? Unless there is construction equipment nearby, that is. In what capacity? Might as well go for broke, but Nezu had a bad feeling about this. The sinking feeling that the child would not accept his offer or any offer of help because he believed he didn't deserve it. I would like you to become a student here. I think you would fit in very well. Specter tensed, wide-eyed. But I don't even exist. I can't be a student. It wasn't a no. You do exist. You don't understand. Sorry. I didn't mean to yell. I do not know everything about your situation, but I know enough. Legal tangles can be rectified. It's not that simple. One last card to play. I believe it is that simple. You still have an identity to claim, Midoriya Izuku. The child froze, a deer before an oncoming semi-truck. I do not understand why you have chosen to carry on as you do. I doubt anyone can understand. No situation quite like yours has ever existed before, but mistakenly filed death certificates are a part of, life, and there are procedures for rectifying such errors. The ghost just hunched his shoulders further and shook his head. Shouldn't be. What? Changed? It shouldn't be changed. He is dead. Izuku is dead and he deserved it. The ghost was crying now. Nezu bowed his head. Worst case scenario, then. Aizawa stepped in, reaching out to place a hand on the ghost's shoulder. Specter. No one deserves to die like that, no one. Not Midoriya, not you. But the conversation and emotions had spiraled out of control. Specter took off from his seat, lunging for a picture window, vanishing and vanishing through it. Aizawa sighed deeply, collapsing in his chair like a misfolded origami crane. That went about as badly as possible. Not quite. Nothing is on fire. Things could have been on fire. Perhaps we should have contacted his mother and brought her along. Nezu shook his head. Specter would have bolted the moment he saw her and maybe never have been heard from again. The littlest vigilante might never come back as it was. No. Quite the opposite, I should not have used his name. I should have merely invited him back for regular tea. I did not anticipate quite that level of psychological mayhem, though perhaps I should have. Specter had seemed very intelligent and very reasonable up until then. As best I can tell, his life was miserable. He felt useless, like a burden dragging down friends and family. Then he died and came back. Given the opportunity, he created a new identity for himself and made a scapegoat of his old self, or maybe he shuns himself for an entirely different reason. Nezu still knew so little about the child, but having spoken to someone once, he could pick up thousands of little details to improve his profile. I think he's ashamed of how he lived and how he died, so resentful. That he threw away his life, that he prefers to think of himself as someone entirely new in order to escape the pain and self-reproach. Aizawa considered this and shrugged. Seems as likely as anything else from what I've seen of the kid. What a mess. Now what? What to do now indeed? Nezu was obligated on some vague level to inform Mrs. Midoriya of the situation, but what if Specter never came back? That would be unspeakably cruel. To dangle her dead child before her and then rip him away again. The boy would never speak to her right now, anyway. That much was obvious. Keep quiet, then. Send Aizawa back on his ghost hunt, hope Specter returned. There was no further discussion to be had here. But Nezu would have this one. It was just a matter of time. Have this one, save this one, same difference. Despite Nezu's determination, Aizawa would not see Specter again for weeks. Specter pulled his arms close, whirling like a dancer, pirouetting on his toes. Thunder cracked like a whip, rain dumping in sheets on hair already soaked black as coal. Whirl, Step not too far tight against the ledge. The 40-story gap yawned hungrily at him. Revel on the edge, bare feet cold as the pathetic iron rail meant to keep him back. Tango with an invisible partner, the roll of thunder leading the storm's orchestra. Lights fluttered up from the world below, their world, not his. One step, two step, looking down. Who's looking up? Arms spread, soaked hair pushed back. Specter plunged from his height free like the birds for one brief moment before gravity bound him up again with a resounding crack. Rain pounded him down, aches and howls of phantom pains unbearable, so he lay still, waited for his body, such as it was, to remember he was dead. Pain seeped away into the concrete. A tangle of shoes stepped about and through him, little patches of respite driving the rain away as the owners of the shoes brandished their umbrellas against the downpour. Specter rolled over, staring up at the angry sky, water pouring into his eyes, fogging his vision, blurring the neon lights, twisting his already flawed world. No escape. What if he had to stay here forever? Immortal? Untouchable? Just let him leave, move along, face whatever comes next. Give him peace, quiet. A raven swept down to Specter's side on whispering wings. It shook the water from its feathers, croaked, and pet its head. The black eyes stared right at Specter, seeing him. Morgan. Ravens as messengers, guides, shepherds to the afterlife. You can take me there? I can take you there. Right here? Right now. Right here. Right now. Do I just follow you? You just follow me. It spoke without speaking, knew without looking, and Specter struggled to his feet, stepped forward, even as images flew unbidden into his mind. Mother, Kaken, Shuto, Tokoyami, Azui, Aizawa, people he'd fought, people he'd saved. Too much unsaid, unfinished, undecided. He couldn't. Not just yet. Later? Not just yet. Later. The raven dipped its head in a bow and vanished, powering effortlessly through the maelstrom. Not yet. Wrap things up, then go. But he could. He could be dead, really dead, anytime. Whenever he wrung the last of those haunting faces from his mind. What irony that it was the dead who were haunted by the living. Specter put his thoughts of oblivion aside once more and went back to work. Analyzing fights is easy. Emotions not so much. Izuku had officially died months into Specter's vigilante work, right after he started following Eraser around. Every time the name came up, a great, miserable hole drained all the warmth from Specter's soul, all the loss, the sorrow, the pain, the self-loathing fed by the flames of ultimate self-destruction. Izuku hadn't been worthless, just thought he was, and so he threw all his worth on the pyre, and that was a sin unforgivable. Even the devils under the sea would turn up their noses at a soul like that. Izuku was nothing but a curse, a confused curse, making everyone around him miserable. So Specter laid him down in his grave and took his new name, changed himself, and said, I am blameless in all this. I can have some peace. Izuku deserved to be miserable, but I don't. He might not deserve to be happy. He had felt guilty about enjoying his ice cream and his late-night story session with Tokoyami, but he didn't deserve to be miserable. It was a brand new world as long as Izuku stayed dead. Specter could have friends in class, where he often sat on someone's desk listening attentively with the rest of 1A. He could prowl the streets and call them his home, reinvent himself, but then they had called him Izuku. Nedzu and Aizawa. They were going to dig up his past life. Somehow they knew. Specter took the bullet train as far away as he could. He stalked down criminals in the shadiest parts of unfamiliar cities, tried not to think, spent his days lounging on top of shelves at the library, his nights hunting scum. He moved again. No sense staying put long enough for the police to spot his MO. Anonymous streetlights cast half-shadows through him, reflecting on the rain-soaked pavement like fire. He moved through the alleys and darted past the main streets, amidst the city but not part of it, amidst life but not immersed in it. He burned as he stared them down. Even the very least of them had a gift he could never have himself, breath stolen by Izuku. They were lucky, the gaudy business people strutting to their glass sky castles, the homeless drag fiends roughing their nights under bridges, and everyone in between. Jealousy, that was it. He was jealous of them, especially since many didn't even realize they had anything on them worth coveting. He didn't know this city, these people with their 1,000-carat smiles and gemstone eyes. They weren't his people, and where he should love and care, where he should be happy for them, he coveted things from them. It wouldn't do to think this way. Find a new city. Distance. Remember who you are, what you love. Save people. Help people. Love people. Be someone. Be something. It's hard to be a forgotten ghost. To be dead and have no connection with the living. A new city, a new library. What if Nezu told Izuku's mother? He winced at the very thought, waking violently from a drowsy half-meditation. All good reasons to stay away, only one reason to go back: loneliness. Loneliness won out within another week. Dark streets blurred into one, everything a great, crushing weight on one who wasn't sure anymore of even who he was. It's not special, just a stockpile, just another piece weaving into her own power. Frogs could be ferocious. Budget's frogs would eat each other alive if given the opportunity. Mantella's and arrow frogs could deal agony with a touch. Cane toads dealt death to would-be predators. She was not so ferocious as they, or she hadn't been, but the power that soaked into her now changed that. She felt her skin glow electric blue and blackened arrow frogs patterning surging to the surface, an endless well providing energy that permeated every cell of her body. That's it, kid, Gran Torino clapped. Gran Torino, Aizawa, All Might, and Recovery Girl waited on the sidelines as Tsuyu pulled one for all to life for the very first time. Aizawa nodded to her slowly and Tsuyu lunged, energy flowing through her far more than she had intended. She cleared the gym in an instant, far wall rushing to meet her roll, get feet in front of you, break the impact like any other jump. Her ears rang and bones jarred at the impact, both of the takeoff and the landing. She was practically on the ceiling. Rip, she coughed out, gingerly sliding down the wall. Her ankle was sprained at the very least. Tsuyu hopped over to her teachers. Sorry, Ribbit. I hurt my ankle on the landing, didn't mean to do that. Recovery Girl sighed, kissing the student's forehead. Told you to be careful, dearie. She had tried. May I try again? Once more, said Aizawa. Less power this time. I will stop you if necessary. Deep breaths, feel the power, don't fight it, let it flow through and do no harm. She jumped, lunging the length of the gym yet again, the wall and floor lazily rising to meet her, so she caught herself with ease. There was not so much as a twinge from her abused muscles and ligaments. Much better. All Might called to her, breaking off with a cough. Tsuyu grinned. That was fun. She showed off in sparing the week before finals. There had been occasional comments from females in the class, and a few males, about drop-kicking Mineta into the sun. After the third time the pervert tried to grab her backside during their match, she decided to try it. The electric blue and black patterns crackled over her skin and Mineta's eyes flew wide. She didn't kick him in the traditional sense, rather pushed him with a foot. She was trying to scare him, not kill him. Whoa, shouted Siro, pausing mid-punch in his bout. With Kaminari, Mineta bounced to a stop, tears in his eyes. Sorry, Ribbit. She wasn't that sorry. Maybe it was overkill, but she wasn't that sorry. That is so cool. Kirishima gushed, running over to Q. I didn't know you could do that. She'd have to pass it off, for now, as just a part of her quirk. It's new, Karo. What else can you do? Asked Siro, Kaminari following behind him. Did I tell you to stop? Demanded Aizawa. No, sir, the lot chorused, getting back to work. Mineta stared in terror at Tsuyu. This was satisfying on some dastardly level. Come at me, Karo. It was an enjoyable afternoon. I think you need to change your name, Uraraka said as the girls changed back into their regular uniforms. Ribbit? Uraraka was talking about her, right? Why? Froppy is cute and reassuring, but it doesn't bring across how. Badass, suggested Jiro with a slightly sadistic grin. Just how badass you are. You were always a good fighter, but that was awesome. The markings, too, like a dart frog, don't quite fit the name, Yayorozu agreed, but these kind of choices are up to you, of course. How about dart? No, definitely not. Arrow. Still too violent. That's not something she wanted to call herself, whether she looked like a poison arrow frog or not. Mantella, Tsuyu mused. Hmm, asked Uraraka. The Madagascar poison arrow frogs, ribbit. I like it. Uraraka bubbled. So you liked it too? Maybe she would change her name after all. Her life was changing dramatically, perhaps her name ought to reflect that. She could be more than she ever imagined, faster, stronger, and if she worked at it she could be better too. Too many people assumed better and more power were synonymous, but Tsuyu knew better. She would be better for Shinso, who nearly died before her at the USJ, for Aizawa, who nearly died for her at the USJ, for All Might, who trusted her, for her younger siblings who depended on her, for the people who might flourish or perish by her actions. If you could turn back time, let's say 10 years max, and change one thing you did, what would you change and why? It was Ashido's turn in the question game, in which one person posed a complicated question and everyone else in class had to answer. It was a good way to kill time on the bus as it trundled away to the training camp. Tsuyu hadn't expected anything deep from Ashido. She had expected this question to be trivial, but that was not the case. Maybe she had misjudged the pink-haired girl. The game had numerous highlights so far, both good and bad. Mineta tried to pose F, marry, kill as his question. It was vetoed. Jiro demanded, what modern political figure would you most like to see run up a flagpole? The current American and Brazilian presidents were popular choices. Ciro asked, what is the silliest misunderstanding you've ever been involved in? And Tokoyami replied, I am very fond of black tea. My mother told me I should cut out caffeinated beverages. In her defense, I was up to 10 cups a day. However, someone kept bringing me black tea in the morning during breakfast. When I thanked my father for it, he did not know what I was talking about, so I confronted my mother. She kept telling me not to drink so much caffeine and then kept giving me more. It turned out Dark Shadow was bringing me tea. That got a host of laughs and an undignified squawk from the familiar in question, who responded, I was trying to be nice. Classmates began to chime in with answers to Mina. Convince my past self not to get that crummy 6th grade haircut, said Ciro. Get a subscription to a certain gym a few years earlier, said Mineta. Maybe he wasn't being perverted for once? No, there was probably some underlying meaning there which Tsuyu should just never think about. Report my first foster mother for child neglect. Shinso shut the whole bus up for a solid 15 seconds. Tsuyu always suspected he had an unpleasant past. Are you okay now, Karo? Sure. Another 15 seconds of silence. Go with my sister on that trip to Russia, Ojiro finally said. Warn the teachers about the USJ. Yayarozu looked unamused, perhaps annoyed she was the first to suggest it, so we could set up an ambush. Sada shrugged. I don't know. Avoid getting that one detention in middle school maybe? I didn't even break the window, they just thought I did. Tokoyami sighed. Avoid losing my first edition of At the Mountains of Madness. That must have been expensive. Tsuyu winced in sympathy. Keep my little brother from falling off the slide and breaking his leg, Karo. What she wouldn't do to spare him that pain. I once saw a car get hit by a train, Uraraka said. I'd warn the driver to get out, or maybe just pull him out, anything to get him out of the stalled car. Kaminari was going to expose a corrupt local politician and get him arrested before he could be elected. Jaira was going to avoid attending a certain, disastrous music festival. Hagakure wanted to transfer to a different middle school. Apparently everyone had been just awful to her, like in the old movie Mean Girls, for the full first year. Aoyama wanted to avoid a fall from a bridge when he was in elementary school. Run away. Todoroki had never sounded more sincere. Dude? Asked Kirishima cautiously. See what he thought of that. The dual quirk user pointedly turned away. I'd convince my cousin to get tested for cancer earlier. Maybe she'd still be alive, Kirishima admitted. Ashido winced, as did a majority of the class. Sorry, I didn't mean for this to be all dark. She waved her hands, and I'm sorry about your cousin. Thanks. More silence. Save Midoriya Izuku, said Bakugo. Kirishima grimaced. He must know something. The rest of the class stared at the explosion wielder. None of your business, Bakugo muttered. He probably hadn't really meant to give such a sincere answer to Mina's question. The stares continued. Fine. He was my classmate and my neighbor. Threw himself off the roof during our senior year of middle school. Happy now. No, so you said. No one is happy. When the frog girl squinted, for a blink and you'll miss it moment, she swore she saw a silhouette standing in the aisle of the bus. Tsu shook her head, must be seeing things. We're sorry about your cousin, Kirishima, and your classmate, Deku. After a moment, the bleach blonde muttered what might have been a thank you and turned away. The next few questions were carefully designed for lighter subject material. It was the middle of the DMN night, but someone was watching him. Katsuki cracked an eye open. Where was the watcher? Why would you say that? Whispered a familiar voice. A dream, then a cruel one. Katsuki had them a lot, deserved them, every one of them. Say what, Izuku? His voice was so slurred it might as well be a water slide. That you'd save me. That dumb game on the bus where he'd said stupid crap. 'Cause I would. What's the point, Kaken? You hated me. You told me to jump. I was useless, dragged everyone down, and I threw all my chances for the future away. Who does that? People who would take their own lives deserve to die. I deserve it. Idiot. Same old Deku. This was new, though, no pleading, sobbing, berating, just Deku's bloody, transparent corpse in need of some straightening out and some comfort. Okay, Katsuki could do that. You got it all wrong, Zuku. Never hated you, and all kinds of great, smart people killed themselves. Wow, he really was half asleep to be talking like that. Virginia Woolf, Sylvia Plath, and countless other poets. Van Gogh, Romeo and Juliet. 'Cause they were sad, like you. 'Cause depression doesn't work with logic, and having assholes like me around doesn't help. They were smart, deserved to live, brilliant just like you. You're not bad or wrong or whatever. You didn't fail this world failed you. Never gave you a reason. Katsuki reached up to pat Deku on the shoulder. I'm a BS-tier and I'm sorry. Would you have forgiven me? If you could. The phantom was crying. Also textbook Deku. The ghost leaned down to Katsuki's ear. I forgive you, he whispered. That wasn't at all what he expected to hear. Maybe the counseling was paying off after all. And yourself, Katsuki told him. The Specter turned away without a word, no promises, then. Rest in peace, Izuku. Deserved better, weird dream. As if he didn't have enough problems and little enough sleep, the problem child was waiting by his door. That wasn't really a problem per se, so much as the solution to one. A truckload of anxiety dropped off Shuta's shoulders. Oh, thank God, he heard himself say. The ghost blinked up at him. May I talk to you, sir? Shoyuta nodded and shepherded the child into his room, closing the door gently and flicking on a soft light lamp. I'm very glad to see you, but I do want to know why you came back, Specter, and what I can do for you now. Specter hesitated. I was lonely. I came back a while ago, and then I heard Bakuga yesterday on the bus. Shoyuta nodded. He had heard Bakuga's comment as well and wondered yet again whether waiting to reveal Specter as Midoriya Izuku was the right choice. And then I talked to him. He thought he was dreaming, but he said some things, and I thought Izuku was a coward, that he got what he deserved, that no one would miss someone who was such useless, burdensome garbage, and I ought to leave him undisturbed in his grave. But Specter sank into himself again. Wait. Let him speak in his own time. He needs to say these things, to have this out on the table. But maybe that's wrong? That was it, all the ghost could choke out, but it would do. Shoyuta reached out for the kid's shoulder, feeling solid, fabric-coated flesh beneath his touch, and pulled the vigilante forward into a half-hug, using one hand to pet the part of Specter's hair which wasn't matted with blood. The child stiffened, but didn't draw away, clutching abortively at Shuta's shirt. Don't want to get blood on you, Specter muttered. I've been covered in more of worse things, Shoyuta sighed. You're right, Specter, he said carefully. Have to be gentle with a flighty one like this, in that you're wrong. You are not worthless now, and you never were. You do not deserve to be dead or to be miserable, and you are sorely missed. I know for a fact that Bakuga would do anything to take back what he said to you. I've met your mother too. There's nothing she wouldn't give up just to see you again. Specter trembled, eyes widening. I'm not going to force you to do anything. I can't, as you're well aware. My quirk doesn't work on you, and even if I could force you, I would not. It would do much more harm than good to rush this. Okay, Specter replied. But I will ask you to at least think about revealing your continued existence. A lot of people would be spared a lot of pain. Not that many, Specter whispered, and what would they think of me, knowing I could have told them a year ago? They're in no position to judge you. No one is. Now please stay here, okay? Specter considered for a moment, then nodded meekly. You can sleep on the couch if you like, Shoyuta told Specter. It was time to get the day over with. Specter blinked. I don't really sleep. So what do you do? Every day, I mean. Well, during the night I patrol, and during the day my powers mostly fade, so I find a place to doze. Trees, beaches, abandoned buildings, public places. I hang out in libraries a lot, to keep up with studies. Specter fidgeted. Sorry. For what? Rambling. I am too tired for this, we'll talk in the morning. Can I count on you being here tomorrow? The ghost nodded again. Thank you. Do as you please. You always do, so long as it doesn't make you happy. Poor thing. I'll see you in the morning. Please let him stick around this time.